Don't sign anything. It's a trap. She said it in Sicilian, a dialect so old, so buried that even most Sicilians no longer spoke it. She said it without looking at him. She said it while pouring his wine, her hand perfectly steady, her face completely blank. Matteo Valenti had survived 31 years in a world where the wrong word at the wrong moment got people killed. He had never frozen. Not once. Until tonight. Until a waitress nobody had ever noticed leaned close and whispered 3 words that should have been impossible for her to know. If this story already has your heart pounding, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's get into it. The restaurant was called Tre Luci. 3 lights. It had no sign above the door. No listing in any guidebook. No photographs on any website that anyone could find without already knowing where to look. It occupied the ground floor of a building on a narrow street in Lower Manhattan, where the sidewalk was still cobblestone, where the smell of old brick mixed with garlic and cigarette smoke that seemed to have soaked into the walls decades ago and never left. To eat at Tre Luci, you had to be invited. To be invited, you had to be someone. And the someone who had reserved the private dining room in the back for this particular Thursday evening in October was a man who had not eaten in a restaurant that required a reservation in over 12 years. Matteo Valenti did not wait for tables. Restaurants waited for him. He was 44 years old, and he carried those years the way certain men carried expensive suits, not with comfort exactly, but with absolute certainty that they belonged on his body. He was not a large man. He was not the kind of man who needed to be large. His presence filled a room the way cold air fills a room. You felt it before you identified the source. People moved differently when Matteo Valenti was nearby. They spoke more carefully. They chose their words with the precision of people who understood that some mistakes could not be apologized for. He ran Valenti Capital on paper. On paper, Valenti Capital was a private investment firm with offices in Manhattan, Milan, and Zurich. On paper, it managed portfolios for high-net-worth clients across 3 continents. On paper, Matteo Valenti was a sophisticated businessman who had built something remarkable from the foundation his father left behind. On paper, everything was clean. What existed beneath the paper was a different architecture entirely. But tonight was not about what existed beneath. Tonight was about the paper itself, a partnership agreement between Valenti Capital and a European logistics consortium called Meridian Group. 47 pages, 12 years of groundwork. A deal that would move money through channels that no government agency currently monitored, through companies that existed in jurisdictions where questions were discouraged, into operations that would expand Matteo's reach into territories he had been building toward since he was 26 years old, and first understood how the world actually functioned. This deal was everything. And the men sitting across from Matteo at the long private table, 2 of them both European, both arriving that afternoon on a private flight from Geneva, were the final piece. Carlo Dente was 51, heavy through the shoulders, with thick gray hair and small eyes that moved constantly and rarely landed on the person he was speaking to. He represented the financial side of Meridian. Anton Voss was younger, 40 perhaps. He had the kind of stillness that certain trained people cultivate, the stillness of a man who had learned that movement drew attention, and attention was dangerous. He said almost nothing. He watched everything. Matteo had done business with Europeans before. He understood their rhythms, the long dinners, the careful conversation that circled the actual subject for an hour before landing on it, the importance of wine, the performance of trust that had to be completed before any document appeared on the table. He understood all of it. What he did not understand was the woman refilling the water glasses near the far end of the table. She had been there since they arrived, part of the restaurant's small private dining staff, invisible in the way that good service personnel trained themselves to be. She moved quietly. She anticipated needs before they were expressed. She refilled glasses just before they emptied. She removed plates at the precise moment when the last bite had been taken. She was good at her job in the way that people are good at jobs they have been performing for a long time out of necessity rather than passion. Matteo noticed competent people the way predators notice movement automatically without deciding to. He noticed her. He filed her away. And then Carlo Dente began speaking in Sicilian. It was a calculated choice. Matteo recognized it immediately. Carlo had been speaking Italian all evening, clean northern Italian, the kind spoken in Milan and Turin. The shift to Sicilian was deliberate. It was the linguistic equivalent of closing a door, a signal to Anton that the conversation had moved into a register that no one within earshot was meant to follow. Matteo himself understood Sicilian. His father had spoken it with certain old associates, men who remembered a time when the dialect carried weight and meaning beyond its geography. He had absorbed it the way children absorb everything, through years of proximity, through listening, through the particular education that comes from understanding that some conversations were not meant for children to understand, which meant you understood them all the more carefully. Carlo said, "The warehouse coordinates have been confirmed." Anton responded in the same dialect. "Good, the device is already in place." Matteo kept his face completely neutral. He lifted his wine glass. He set it down. He let Carlo continue the performance of discussing the deal terms in Italian, nodding at the appropriate moments, asking a question about the third quarter projections in the Zurich portfolio. But inside, something very cold and very precise was calculating. The warehouse. Matteo was supposed to visit a warehouse in Brooklyn after the dinner. His team had arranged it, a facility inspection, the kind of logistical meeting that always accompanied deals of this scale. The paperwork would be signed here at this table. Then, within the hour, Matteo would travel to the warehouse to walk the space to see the physical infrastructure that the Meridian Partnership would utilize. Device. That word in Sicilian did not require interpretation. He had perhaps 40 minutes before the signature was expected, and he had just understood that the signature was the signal. Sign the documents, confirm the location, drive to the warehouse, never leave. He was very still. He was the stillest he had been in years. And then, in that exact moment, he felt it. The slight pressure of someone leaning close. The soft sound of wine being poured into his glass. And a voice, barely above breath, in Sicilian. In the precise dialect of Carlo's speech, mirrored back with an accuracy that made the hair on his arms rise. "Don't sign anything. It's a trap. The warehouse has a device." The bottle moved away. The woman straightened. She walked back to her station without looking at him. Her expression had not changed. Her hands had not trembled. She had delivered those words as calmly as she might have said the soup of the day. And Matteo Valenti, who had not frozen in 31 years, sat completely motionless for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds was a long time. He recovered. That was the thing about men like Matteo. The ability to recover was not optional. It was the first skill you built before everything else, because without it, nothing else survived contact with reality. You felt the shock. You processed it. You returned to the surface of yourself and continued performing whatever the moment required. He raised his glass. He said something to Carlo about the Geneva portfolio. He laughed at something Anton said. He was present, engaged, the ideal dinner companion for men who were planning to kill him. And beneath that surface, his mind was moving at a speed that had kept him alive through situations that should have been unsurvivable. Question 1. Was the woman an operative? If she was, she worked for someone, and that someone had just chosen to warn him rather than allow the trap to close. That was information. It meant there were opposing factions. It meant the Meridian deal was being watched by parties who had a stake in Matteo remaining alive. Question 2. Was this a second trap? The warning itself could be designed to cause him to react in a way that exposed something. If he fled now, if he refused to sign, if he called for his security too obviously, that reaction would tell Carlo and Anton something. It would confirm that the trap had been identified. It would remove the possibility of controlled response. Question 3. How had a waitress known? He let that question sit for a moment, because it was the one he could not answer. And unanswerable questions were the ones that required the most careful handling. He made a decision. He reached into his jacket pocket for his phone. He excused himself briefly, a call he had been expecting. He apologized just 2 minutes, and he walked toward the small corridor near the kitchen. He texted 3 words to his head of security, "Change the location." The response came back in 11 seconds. "Understood. New site." He texted, "Anywhere. Make it real. Brief the team." Then he put his phone away and returned to the table. He smiled at Carlo Dente. He said, "I have a small adjustment to the evening's schedule. I hope that's acceptable." Carlo smiled back with the ease of a man who was not yet aware that everything had just shifted. "Of course," Carlo said. "Business is always flexible." "It is," Matteo agreed. And he thought, "Not as flexible as you're about to discover." The dinner continued for another 37 minutes. Matteo signed nothing. He explained graciously that his legal team had flagged a minor discrepancy in the indemnification clause. Nothing significant, purely procedural, the kind of last-minute detail that his attorneys always insisted on resolving before ink touched paper. He hoped Carlo and Anton would forgive the delay. The documents would be couriered to their hotel by 9 in the morning. They would have them signed and returned by noon. Carlo's smile remained steady, but his eyes went to Anton for exactly 1/5 of a second. Matteo caught it. He catalogued it. He said nothing. They finished their wine. They discussed unimportant things: the weather in Geneva, a restaurant in Milan that Anton preferred, an art exhibition that Carlo had recently attended. The performance of the evening continued until the performance could be gracefully concluded. When they stood to leave, Matteo shook both their hands with the warmth of a man who fully trusted the people he was touching. As they walked through the restaurant toward the exit, Matteo turned as though checking whether he had left his phone on the table. He hadn't. But it gave him the moment he needed. He found her. She was near the bar, moving methodically, not looking in his direction. He walked toward her. She did not run. She did not pretend not to see him. She simply continued what she was doing until he was close enough to speak quietly. "You speak Sicilian," he said. Not a question. "I speak several things," she said. She set down the tray she was carrying and looked at him with an expression that was remarkably composed for someone standing across from Matteo Valenti at close range. "Your name?" "Elena Russo." "How long have you worked here?" 3 years. "Before this, other restaurants?" "Before that, other things." She paused. "I heard what they said. I understood what it meant. I had about 4 seconds to decide what to do with that. I made a decision." "Why did you warn me?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I know what a device in a warehouse means," she said. "And I'm not the kind of person who hears something like that and pretends she didn't." Matteo studied her for a moment, the way he studied people, completely efficiently, without the social performance of appearing not to stare. "You need to leave this restaurant right now," he said, "with me." She shook her head. "I have a shift that ends at 11. "Elena?" He said her name once quietly. "Those men are going to be outside within the next 8 minutes. And when they realize what happened, and they will realize tonight, possibly within the hour, the first thing they are going to do is find out who warned me. And the second thing they're going to do is find you." She held his gaze. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she untied the apron from her waist, folded it neatly, and placed it on the bar. "Okay," she said. "But I need to get my coat." She had a coat from a department store that had probably cost $40, and she put it on with the same composure she had demonstrated all evening, and she walked out of Tre Luci beside Matteo Valenti as though she did this kind of thing regularly. His car was waiting. His head of security, a man named Donovan Reed, quiet, careful, built like someone who had spent 20 years making himself harder to hurt, held the door without expression, and assessed Elena with one long professional glance that missed nothing. Inside the car, in the smooth silence that expensive vehicles provided, Elena sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked straight ahead. Matteo's phone was already in his hand. He spoke in clipped quiet sentences to people who would now begin the process of understanding what had nearly happened tonight. After several minutes, he lowered the phone. "Where did you learn Sicilian?" he asked. "My grandmother," Elena said. "She came from a village outside Palermo. She raised me after my parents died. She spoke it every day. She told me that a language no one expected you to know was the most useful thing you could carry." "How old were you when your parents died?" 7. "I'm sorry." She turned to look at him briefly. "Thank you," she said, as though the condolence surprised her. "What else do you speak?" "Italian, Spanish. Enough French to navigate, but not enough to be comfortable. Some Portuguese. My grandmother believed in languages the way some people believe in religion." Matteo processed this. "The accent you used," he said. "When you warned me, it was exact. You didn't just speak Sicilian, you spoke it the way he spoke it. Same regional variation, same vowel patterns." "I know," she said. "That is not a skill that comes from casual learning." "No," she said. "It doesn't." A moment of silence. "Who taught you to listen like that?" he asked, and for the first time all evening something shifted in Elena's expression. Not vulnerability exactly. Something more complicated. The look of a person deciding how much of a true answer to give. "Nobody taught me," she said finally. "I taught myself. When you grow up with nothing, and you work in rooms where powerful people talk around you because they don't think you're worth noticing, you either stop listening, or you learn to listen better than anyone in the room." Matteo was quiet. "They talked around you," he said. "For 3 years. That restaurant had a lot of private dining rooms, a lot of important people who thought I was furniture. And you understood all of it. Enough of it." He looked at her for a long moment. "What did you hear?" he said. "Over 3 years. What did you understand?" She turned to meet his eyes. "That's a very large question," she said. "And I'm going to need to know a great deal more about tonight before I answer it." His team was already at the warehouse in Brooklyn when they got the call. Not the original warehouse. Matteo had changed the location before leaving the restaurant. His people had gone to a secondary address on a pretext giving the appearance that the plan was proceeding on schedule. But they had also sent a separate team quietly through back channels to the original warehouse. What they found there took Matteo's head of security 11 minutes to report back. 2 devices. Donovan said, his voice carrying that particular flatness that professionals used when describing things that should horrify but could not be allowed to. Military grade, placed at the structural points. If the building had been occupied and those went off simultaneously, it would have been complete. Matteo was standing in the kitchen of a secured apartment that his organization maintained for exactly these situations. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table. She had been given water, which she was drinking carefully, and she had been very still since they arrived. He turned to look at her. "You said you needed to know more about tonight before you answered my question," he said. "Now you know." She set down the glass. "They were going to kill everyone in that building," she said. "Not a question." "Everyone in that building and the building itself," Donovan said from the doorway. Elena looked at her hands. "The 2 men at the table," she said. "The one who spoke Carlo. He mentioned a name before you came back from your phone call. He said it quickly in a phrase that sounded casual, but it wasn't." She paused. "He said, 'Il vecchio approva,' the old man approves." Donovan went still. Matteo went still in a different way. "You heard that," Matteo said. "While I was clearing the table to your left. You were in the corridor." They lowered their voices, but not enough. She looked up at him. "You understood what that means. I can see that you understood." "Who is the old man to you?" Matteo asked carefully. "I don't know," Elena said. "I'm telling you what I heard. What you do with it is your business. And yet," Matteo said quietly, "you are sitting in my kitchen at 11:15 on a Thursday night, and Carlo Dente's people are almost certainly already looking for you. That makes it your business too, whether you want it to be or not." She absorbed this. "Okay," she said. "Then tell me what Il Vecchio means in your world. And I'll tell you if I've heard anything else that might be useful." Matteo pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. For the first time in a very long time, he found himself sitting across from someone he could not entirely read. It was, he acknowledged this carefully, not entirely an unpleasant experience. "Il Vecchio," he said. "The old man. It's what certain people in certain circles use to refer to the most senior authority. Not a description, a title." "There's a senior authority above you?" she asked. "There's a senior authority above everyone," he said. "The question is which one Carlo was referring to, and that tells you who sent them." "Yes," she nodded slowly. "Then you have a problem that's bigger than tonight," she said. "I do. And the fact that they failed tonight means they're going to try again." "They will." She looked at him with those steady, unreadable eyes. "So what do we do now?" What they did in the immediate term was establish a perimeter. Matteo's people were very good at this. Within 90 minutes of leaving Treluci, there were 4 men positioned around the building they were in, 3 others tracking the movements of Carlo Dente and Anton Voss, and a 7th individual, a woman named Sandra, who ran the technical side of Matteo's security operation. With the methodical precision of someone who had once worked for a government agency, she was not permitted to name monitoring every digital signal connected to either man's devices. Elena watched all of this from the kitchen with the expression of someone who was reassessing a significant number of assumptions. "This is not a normal investment firm," she said at one point. "Did you think it was?" Matteo asked. "No," she said. "But there's a difference between knowing something is true and watching the evidence of it operate in real time." Donovan appeared in the kitchen doorway again. "The men at the restaurant," he said. "We found records. The reservation was made through 3 shell companies. The passports they used are legitimate forgeries, extremely high quality. Eastern European production." "Meridian Group?" Matteo asked. "The holding company in Geneva exists. It's real. But the 2 men who came tonight are not its representatives. The actual Meridian Group doesn't appear to know their names." Elena spoke up. "That means someone used the deal as a vehicle," she said. "They constructed a legitimate business negotiation as cover for getting close to you." Both men looked at her. "I listen to people talk about money and business for a living," she said simply. "That's not complicated." Donovan looked at Matteo. Matteo said nothing, but something shifted in his expression, the very slight recalibration of a man updating his assessment. "No," he agreed. "It's not complicated, but it required access. Someone had to know about the Meridian deal. Someone had to know the timeline, the location, the structure of the evening." The sentence landed in the room with its full weight. Someone inside. Elena heard it. She did not say it aloud, but her eyes met Matteo's for a moment, and he saw that she had followed the logic to the same place he had. "I need to make some calls," he said. He stood. He paused beside the table. He looked down at Elena Russo, the woman from the restaurant, the invisible waitress, the woman with the $40 coat, and the grandmother from Palermo, who had taught her that a language no one expected you to know was the most useful thing you could carry. "You saved my life tonight," he said. She looked up at him. "You hadn't saved mine yet," she said. "I was protecting an investment." He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile he had produced in a considerable amount of time. "Get some rest," he said. "We have a great deal to discuss tomorrow." "I know," she said, and she said it with the calm certainty of someone who had already decided she was not going anywhere. He made his calls from the room at the end of the hall. 3 calls, each one precise. Each one to a person who would understand immediately that the conversation they were having was the most important conversation they would have this week. The first call was to his attorney, a man named Kessler, who had been managing the legal architecture of Valenti Capital for 16 years, and who answered on the first ring at midnight without any indication that this was unusual. The Meridian signing is suspended indefinitely, Matteo said. I need everything we have on the holding company in Geneva re-verified from scratch. Every document, every identity, every contact point. And Kessler assumed nothing we currently have is accurate. Kessler said, How bad? Matteo said, The warehouse. A pause. I'll have people working by 6 a.m., Kessler said. The second call was to a man named Fortunato, who operated in a space between Matteo's world and the world of people who preferred that Matteo's world not exist. Fortunato was useful precisely because he maintained relationships on both sides of that line. Il Vecchio, Matteo said, who has used that phrase in connection with operations aimed at the East Coast in the last 6 months. Fortunato said, That's a very specific question. I have a very specific reason. Give me 24 hours. You have 16. The third call lasted 43 minutes and was conducted entirely in Italian, and what was discussed in that call would take 3 days to fully understand. When he was done, he sat alone in the quiet of the room for several minutes. He thought about the evening. He walked through it chronologically, examining each moment for what it revealed and what it concealed. Carlo's shift into Sicilian. The specific words chosen. The fraction of a second glance between Carlo and Anton when Matteo declined to sign. The warehouse, the devices, military grade, placed at structural points. Someone inside who knew the timeline. Il Vecchio. And threading through all of it in a way he could not quite categorize, a woman named Elena Russo, who had learned 7 languages because her grandmother believed understanding people was the key to surviving in a world full of strangers. He got up and walked back down the hall. She was still at the kitchen table. She had not tried to sleep. She was sitting with her hands around the water glass, looking at a fixed point on the wall with the expression of someone working through a problem. You're not sleeping, he said. Neither are you. He sat back down across from her. What are you thinking about? He asked. She looked at him. I'm thinking about the fact that Carlo used a phrase before you came back, she said. And I keep coming back to it. Il Vecchio approva, the way he said it, the specific phrasing. What about it? He didn't say Il Vecchio ha approvato, she said. Past tense. The old man has approved. He said approva. Present tense. Active. The old man approves. She paused. It's a small thing. It's not a small thing, Matteo said quietly, because present tense means ongoing authorization. It means the authority hasn't just sanctioned this operation. It's actively monitoring it, real time. Elena nodded slowly. Which means, she said, that whoever Il Vecchio is, they already know tonight failed. The weight of that settled between them. Matteo looked at her across the table. You notice things, he said. Somebody has to, she said. Outside, the city continued in its usual condition of barely controlled chaos. Inside the kitchen of a secured apartment on a quiet street in Lower Manhattan, a woman who had spent 3 years being invisible to powerful men sat across from the most powerful man she had ever served a glass of wine to. And neither of them slept that night, not even close. The morning came in hard, not gradually, the way mornings were supposed to arrive, with light building slowly, with the city warming up at its own pace. This morning hit like a door kicked open. Matteo's phone was already going before 6 a.m., and by the time the first gray light pushed through the window blinds, he had been awake for over an hour, sitting at the table where Elena had fallen asleep, sometime around 3, her head resting on her folded arms, the water glass still in front of her. He had not woken her. He had watched her sleep for approximately 30 seconds, long enough to confirm she was breathing steadily, long enough to notice that even unconscious, she looked like someone braced for impact, and then he had turned away and gone back to his phone. Sandra had results. Carlo Dente's real name is Marco Abruzzo, she said when he called. Born in Catania. Former military Italian special forces discharged under circumstances that aren't in any public record. The last known address is a post office box in Malta. He has operated under at least 6 different identities in the past decade. And Anton Voss. Ghost. That identity was constructed 18 months ago. Whatever he was before that, someone very good erased it. Where are they now? That's the problem, Sandra said. They checked out of the hotel at 4 a.m. Both of them. No forwarding. No transport record I can find yet. They're gone. Matteo absorbed this. Pull everything on the Trelucci staff, he said. I want to know how they selected that restaurant. I want to know if anyone on the inside made a recommendation. A pause on the line. You think someone on your side chose the location? I think someone on my side has been choosing a great many things, he said. I want to know who. He ended the call. Behind him, Elena spoke. They're already gone. He turned. She was awake, had been awake, he suspected, for the last part of that conversation. She sat up straight and pushed her hair back from her face with both hands in a gesture that was entirely unself-conscious. Since 4 a.m., he said. Which means they knew by 3 that it failed, she said. Which means whoever is feeding them information moved fast. Yes. She stood, stretched her neck, picked up the water glass and carried it to the sink. You have a leak, she said. Her back was to him. And it's not small. Someone with real access moved fast enough last night to warn them before dawn. That's not an outsider who picked up a rumor. That's someone who was close enough to your operation to know in real time that the warehouse plan was blown. I know, he said. She turned around. How many people knew about the warehouse visit in advance? He held her gaze for a moment. 7, he said. She did not look away. Then you have 7 people to look at, she said. 6, he said. Donovan told me himself. He flagged the situation before I asked. That leaves 6. Yes. She leaned against the counter with her arms folded. She looked tired but sharp in the way that certain people look sharpest when they haven't slept, when the ordinary defenses are down, and what remains is pure, unfiltered intelligence. What do you need from me? She asked. The question caught him slightly off guard. Not because it was unexpected, but because of the way she asked it. Not what do you want? Not what happens now. What do you need? As though his answer was going to be something she could actually deliver. I need you to stay here, he said. For now. Until we understand the exposure. I have a life, she said. I have an apartment. I have... She stopped. Thought about it. I have a cat. The cat can be retrieved. That's not the point. I know it's not the point. He came closer, not threateningly, but with the directness of someone who had decided to be very clear. Elena, Marco Abruzzo and whoever Anton Voss actually is know that someone at that restaurant heard them and warned me. They don't know who yet, but they will know. These are people who do not leave loose ends. You are currently a loose end. She held his gaze. I was a loose end before I said anything to you, she said. I heard them. Whether I warned you or not, if they'd figured out I understood Sicilian, I'd have been a problem for them. Then you understand the situation. I understood the situation last night when I poured the wine, she said. I'm not fragile. I don't need it explained gently. I'm not being gentle, he said. No, she said. You're being efficient, which is how you handle everything. I can see that. She pushed off from the counter. I'll stay, for now, but I need you to understand something in return. Tell me, I'm not a liability you're managing, she said, and I'm not a witness you're protecting. I heard things in that restaurant for 3 years that your people would probably find very useful. I notice things. I remember things. If you want to use what I know, which I think you do, or you'd have handed me off to Donovan last night and gone home, then we do this as equals. I talk to you directly. I tell you what I know, and you tell me enough to contextualize it. Not everything. I'm not asking for everything. Just enough. Matteo was quiet for a long moment. He was very rarely spoken to this way. It required a specific kind of person, or a specific kind of situation, to produce this kind of conversation with him. All right, he said. She blinked, as though she had expected more resistance. "All right," he said again. "Tell me what you heard. In 3 years. Start with names." She pulled out a chair and sat down. "Okay," she said. "Then get some coffee. This is going to take a while." It took 2 hours and 40 minutes. She had a memory that bordered on architectural, not photographic exactly, but structural. She remembered conversations the way you remember the layout of a building you've walked through hundreds of times. She knew where the important things were. She could move through the corridors of 3 years of overheard dialogue and retrieve specific moments with a precision that made Donovan, who had come in at 7 with coffee and was now sitting very still in the corner, visibly recalibrate his expression twice. She gave names. Some Matteo recognized, some he did not. Some landed on the table with the particular weight of things that had been suspected but never confirmed. She described a conversation from 14 months earlier, 2 men in the second private dining room speaking Italian, discussing a consulting firm based in Luxembourg that had recently changed hands. She had understood enough to catch the word for accounting and the word for hidden, and a specific number repeated 3 times. Matteo's expression did not change, but he wrote something on the notepad he had produced from somewhere. She described a dinner from 8 months ago, a group of 4 mixed languages, English and Italian, switching back and forth. One of the men had used a phrase in Sicilian to another, assuming the others at the table couldn't follow. He had said something about a schedule, a window, a name she had not recognized then. "What was the name?" Matteo asked. She said it. Donovan stood up from his chair, not dramatically, but he stood, which was the Donovan Reed equivalent of dramatic. Matteo put his pen down. "Say that again," he said. She said it again. The 2 men exchanged a look. "Where have you heard that name?" Matteo asked, and his voice had shifted into something quieter and more careful. "I just told you where," Elena said. 8 months ago, a Thursday evening. The table by the far window." She paused. "It means something to you." "It means something," he said carefully. "Yes." "Are you going to tell me what—" He looked at her for a moment. "Not yet," he said. She accepted this. She didn't like it, but she accepted it. He could see both of those things in her expression simultaneously. "Keep going," he said. She kept going. Mao. By 9:15, Matteo had 4 pages of notes and a headache that sat directly behind his left eye, like something that had taken up residence and intended to stay. Elena accepted a second cup of coffee and was quiet for a moment. "There's one more thing," she said. Something in her tone made him set down his pen. "Tell me." She looked at her coffee cup, then up at him. "About 4 months ago, late on a Wednesday, the restaurant was almost empty. I was restocking near the bar, and there were 2 men at a corner table. They'd been there since 8, and it was almost midnight. They'd been speaking in a mix of Italian and English most of the evening." "Go on." "Near the end, one of them made a phone call. He stepped maybe 6 feet away from the table, which is nothing. He spoke in Sicilian, very low, but I was close, and the room was quiet." She paused. "He said, 'The arrangement with Valenti is on schedule. The old one has already approved the mechanism. Once the partnership is finalized, the rest follows automatically.'" The room was very quiet. "The arrangement with Valenti," Matteo said. "Those exact words." 4 months ago." "Yes." "Describe the men." She described them. One of the descriptions, the second man. The one who had not made the call. The one who had sat with his back to the wall and drunk 2 glasses of water over the course of 4 hours without touching either. That description made Matteo go completely still. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to the room. Donovan said nothing. Elena said nothing. The city outside was doing what it always did. Moving, grinding, making its relentless noise completely indifferent to the fact that something had just shifted very fundamentally inside this room. "Matteo," Donovan said after a moment. "I heard her," Matteo said without turning. Another pause. If what she's describing is accurate, Donovan said carefully, then the timeline. I know what the timeline means, Matteo said. He turned back to the room. His face was controlled. Completely controlled. But Elena, who had spent 3 years learning to read what people's faces were doing beneath the performance, saw something very specific in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It was something more complicated than fear. It was the look of a man who had just been forced to consider that a betrayal he had always known was possible had not come from where he expected it to come from. Who was the second man? She asked quietly. The one with his back to the wall. Matteo looked at her. Someone I've known for a very long time, he said. She gave him a moment. I'm sorry, she said. And something in the way she said it, simply without the performance of sympathy, without the elaborate social cushioning that people usually applied to moments like this, made Matteo look at her in a way that was slightly different from all the other ways he had looked at her so far. Don't be sorry yet, he said. We don't know anything yet. Description isn't confirmation. No, she said. We need more. Yes. He pulled out his chair and sat back down. Tell me everything you remember about that night, he said. Start from when they arrived, what they ordered, which server brought their food, what time the phone call happened to the minute. Every word you remember from the Sicilian conversation. All of it. She nodded. And she started from the beginning. By 10 a.m. Kessler called. He had been up since before 6 as promised, and his team had spent the morning pulling apart every document connected to the Meridian partnership. The original contact came through a third party, Kessler said. A referral. Came recommended by... A pause that was slightly too long. Recommended by someone inside your organization. The recommendation bypassed the standard vetting process. It was flagged as low risk because of who made the recommendation. Who made the recommendation? Matteo said. Kessler told him. Matteo closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. He opened them. Send me everything, he said. All of it. Directly to my phone. Nobody else. Understood, Kessler said. And he ended the call without asking any of the questions he was clearly burning to ask because Kessler had survived 16 years in Matteo's world by understanding which questions you asked and which questions you held until you were asked to speak. Matteo set down his phone. Elena was watching him. Same person, she asked. He looked at her. Different piece of the same picture, he said. How long, she asked. How long what? How long has this been happening? The betrayal. How long has whoever this is been working against you? He was quiet. Based on what Kessler just told me, he said, at least 2 years. Elena let that settle. Then they were very patient, she said. The most dangerous people always are, he said. She picked up her coffee cup and then set it down without drinking from it. The Meridian deal wasn't opportunistic, she said slowly. They didn't see an opening and take it. They constructed the opening. 2 years of constructing it, which means this was never about the deal, Matteo said. The deal was the mechanism. The deal was the thing they built the trap around. What was the actual target? He looked at her. Everything, he said. The complete elimination of the structure. Not just me. The people around me. The assets. The relationships. Everything that makes Valenti Capital what it is. Once I was gone, the vacuum would be filled by whoever is behind this, and they'd inherit everything I built. Elena absorbed this. That's not a revenge plot, she said. That's a takeover. Yes. Which means there's real money behind it. Enormous amounts of real money. She sat back in her chair. And Il Vecchio is whoever is running the financial architecture, Matteo said. The person who can authorize the mechanism. The person whose approval Carlo mentioned. So you have a traitor inside who built the pathway, Elena said, and an outside authority who provided the resources and the authorization. In summary, yes. And last night was the activation point. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. "How are you this calm?" she asked. He looked at her with something that might, in very different circumstances, have been amusement. "I'm not calm," he said. "I'm contained. There's a difference." "What does contained feel like?" "Like every single thing I want to do is standing behind a door," he said. "And the door is staying closed until I know enough to open it in the right direction." She held his gaze. "Then let's figure out which direction that is," she said. Donovan came back at 11 with a photograph. He set it on the table in front of Matteo, without commentary. Matteo looked at it for a long time. It was a surveillance image, grainy, taken from a distance, the kind of image that required enhancement to be useful, but was still clear enough to convey the essential information. Two people at a table in a restaurant. The restaurant was not Tre Lucy. It was somewhere else. Somewhere with outdoor seating, somewhere in warm light that suggested a different climate, a different country. One of the people in the photograph was Carlo Dente Marco Abruzzo, face in three-quarter profile, clearly recognizable once you knew what you were looking for. The other person was facing away from the camera. But the jacket, the particular slope of the shoulders, the way the right hand rested on the table with the ring finger slightly bent, a habit so specific and so long-standing that Matteo had spent 20 years sitting across from it at meetings and dinners and in cars and in offices. He knew those shoulders. He knew that hand. "When was this taken?" Matteo said. His voice was very steady. 8 months ago, Donovan said. "Rome." "How did you get it?" "Sandra found it in a file that was flagged 2 years ago and then buried. The flag was removed by someone with administrative access to our security system." The table was very quiet. Elena looked at the photograph without touching it. She looked at the shoulders, the hand, the ring finger. "Is that the same person from the restaurant?" she asked Matteo. "The man with his back to the wall." He did not answer immediately. He picked up the photograph. He looked at it for another 3 seconds. "Yes," he said. "His name is Renato Fiore. He has been my head of international operations for 11 years. The name landed. Donovan remained very still. Elena said nothing. 11 years, Matteo said again, more quietly, almost to himself. "He was there when my father died. He helped me rebuild afterward. He has been at every significant meeting, every significant decision, every significant relationship I have built in over a decade." "Which means he knows all of it," Donovan said. "Everything," Matteo said. "Matteo." Donovan's voice carried the careful weight of someone choosing their next words with extreme precision. "If Fiore is the inside contact, if he's the one who built the pathway and buried the flag and recommended the Meridian connection, then everything you've discussed in his presence for 11 years is potentially compromised." "I know. Every relationship, every asset location, every—" "Donovan." Matteo's voice was quiet and absolute. "I know." Donovan stopped. Elena was watching Matteo. She watched the thing behind his eyes, the contained thing, the door with everything pressed against it, hold. Just hold. She had seen grief before. She had seen the particular kind of grief that comes not from loss, but from revelation. When you realize that something you believed was one thing was always something else, and the years you spent believing in it cannot be given back. Her grandmother had taught her a word for it, in Sicilian. A word that had no precise English equivalent, the feeling of discovering that what you held was not what you thought you were holding. She didn't say the word. She said, "What do we do now?" And Matteo set the photograph face down on the table, and he looked at her and he said, "We don't let him know we know. Not yet. Not until we have everything. How do we get everything without him knowing we're looking?" "Very carefully," he said, "and very fast." Sandra arrived at noon. In person, which was unusual. Sandra operated almost entirely remotely, and her physical presence in a room meant the situation had moved beyond what could be managed through screens and encrypted messages. She was a small woman in her late 40s with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the particular manner of someone who had once worked in environments where imprecision had consequences that could not be undone. She set a laptop on the kitchen table and turned it to face Matteo. "Fiore's communications," she said. 14 months of encrypted messages that were routed through a secondary server he maintains outside our system. It took me 6 hours to crack the architecture. You need to see this." Matteo leaned forward. Elena started to push back her chair to give him space. "Stay," he said without looking at her. She stayed. The messages on Sandra's screen were in Italian. Coded Italian. Not a formal cipher, but the kind of informal coded language that people who communicate frequently develop organically. Specific words standing in for specific meanings. References that required context to interpret. But Elena read Italian, and as Matteo read, she read alongside him. She was 3 messages ahead of where he was when she saw it. "Stop," she said. He stopped. She pointed. "Read that one again," she said. He read it. He read it again. "Il pacco," he said. "The package." "He uses that phrase 9 times in the last 8 months, Elena said. "And each time it appears, it's in the context of something moving, something being transferred. But look at the date pattern." Matteo looked at the dates. Donovan came to stand behind them, reading over their shoulders. "The dates correspond?" Donovan said after a moment. "To what?" Matteo said. "To the dates of our quarterly asset audits," Donovan said. "Every time we ran an internal audit, there's a message about the package moving within 48 hours. The silence in the room had a texture now. "He was moving assets ahead of our audits," Matteo said. "Skimming," Sandra said. "But not money. Look at the amounts implied. This is about information. He's been transferring information packages. Intelligence. Our files." "To whom?" Matteo asked. Sandra took the laptop back, pulled up another screen. "That took longer to trace," she said. "The endpoint is obscured through 4 relay points, but the final destination—" She turned the laptop around again. "Is a company registered in the Cayman Islands, 14 months old, no public-facing operations." She pointed to the registered director. The name meant nothing to Matteo, but the corporate address was a law firm in Geneva, and Matteo knew the law firm, because the law firm had also appeared in the Meridian Group documents. He sat back. He put both hands flat on the table. "It's the same network," he said. "Fiore isn't just the inside contact. He's been feeding intelligence to the same people behind Meridian for over a year. They weren't building a trap. They were building a map. A complete map of everything. I have everything I control, every relationship and asset and operation." He paused. "Last night wasn't the end of this. It was supposed to be. Kill me, inherit the map, step into the structure." "A corporate takeover," Elena said. "With a body count," Matteo said. Donovan said, "We need to move on Fiore before he knows we have this." "How much time do we have?" Matteo asked Sandra. "He doesn't know about my access yet," Sandra said, "but he's not unsophisticated. He'll run a sweep of his communications within the next 24 hours. It's part of his routine. After that, he'll see traces. Then we have 24 hours. Less, Sandra said. To be safe, 18. Matteo looked at the clock. 12 to 14 p.m. He stood up. "Donovan," he said, "I need Fiore's location, and I need it confirmed within the hour." Sandra, continue pulling everything from the secondary server and start building a chain of evidence. "Kessler." He pulled out his phone. "I need to call Kessler." He was already moving toward the corridor. At the kitchen doorway, he paused. He turned back to Elena. She was sitting with her hands on the table, watching him with those level, steady eyes. "You should rest," he said. "You said that last night," she said. "You didn't rest last night." "You didn't either." A pause. "There's a room at the end of the hall," he said. "I know," she said. "I found it at 4 a.m. I sat in there for a while." She paused. "I went back to the kitchen because I couldn't stop thinking." "About what?" She looked at him. About the name I told you this morning. The one from 8 months ago. The one that made Donovan stand up. He waited. I heard that name one other time, she said. I didn't mention it earlier because I wasn't sure it was relevant. But given what Sandra just showed us, tell me. 3 weeks ago, she said. Different man, different table. He made a phone call in the middle of dinner, which people do. It's rude, but they do it, and he stepped away from the table toward the bar. He was close to where I was working. He said the name, and then he said, the mechanism activates on the 15th. The room went very still. Matteo said, what is today's date? Elena said, the 13th. They looked at each other. The deal was supposed to be signed last night, Donovan said from the corner, which would have put everything in motion on a 48-hour cycle. The 15th, Matteo said. They have a contingency, Elena said. Killing you is primary. But if the primary failed, there's a secondary mechanism, Matteo said, already in place, set to activate in 48 hours regardless. What kind of mechanism? Elena asked. I don't know yet, Matteo said. But I'm going to find out. He looked at Elena across the kitchen. Something in the air between them had changed. Not softened exactly. Something more like clarified. The way the air clarifies after a storm when the pressure shifts and everything is suddenly exactly as sharp as it actually is. You should have stayed invisible, he said. Probably, she said. Why didn't you? She held his gaze for a moment. Because my grandmother taught me that silence has a price, she said, and I've spent enough years paying it. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he turned and walked down the corridor, already dialing, already moving, already doing what he had always done, pressing forward into the danger instead of waiting for it to find him. Behind him, Elena put both hands flat on the table. She was very still. She was thinking about the 15th. She was thinking about a mechanism already in place, already counting down, already waiting. And she was thinking about the fact that the only reason anyone in this room knew about it was a woman named Elena Russo, who had spent 3 years being invisible enough to hear things no one ever meant for anyone to hear. She thought 48 hours. She thought it's not over. She thought it hasn't even started yet. And somewhere in the building, a phone rang, and a man answered it, and the next 48 hours began. The phone call lasted 4 minutes. Matteo came back into the kitchen at 12:31, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had just received information that confirmed the worst version of a theory he had been hoping was wrong. He sat down. He put his phone on the table. He looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, the way you look at a thing that has just changed the shape of everything around it. Fortunato came through early, he said. Donovan moved closer. Elena stayed where she was because she had learned in the last 18 hours that Matteo Valenti spoke more freely when he did not feel like he was being watched. She kept her eyes on her coffee cup and her ears on every word. Il vecchio, Matteo said. The name Fortunato gave me is Emilio Conti. Donovan said nothing, but the muscle in his jaw tightened in a way Elena had come to recognize as his version of a strong reaction. You know the name, she said. She wasn't asking. Everyone in this world knows the name, Donovan said. Emilio Conti is 73 years old. He runs a financial network out of Palermo that has been operating since before either of us was born. He is the reason 3 different government investigations have gone nowhere in the last 20 years. He stopped, looked at Matteo. He was your father's contemporary. He was more than that, Matteo said. His voice carried something flat and measured that was more unsettling than anger. He and my father built the early architecture of what became Valenti Capital together. They had a falling out in 1997. My father never fully explained it. After my father died, Conti sent flowers to the funeral and a handwritten note. Elena looked up. A handwritten note, she said, which said, and I memorized this at the time because it felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. What your father built deserves to continue. I hope you prove worthy of it. The kitchen was very quiet. That wasn't condolence, Elena said. No, Matteo said. Looking at it now, it was an evaluation. He was watching to see if I could be managed, if I was someone he could work around or someone he needed to eventually eliminate. And Fiore, Elena said. Fiore was part of the infrastructure my father left behind, Matteo said. He came with the organization. He's been with it since before I took over. He paused. Conti didn't plant Fiore. Conti turned him. There's a difference. At some point in the last 2 years, Emilio Conti made Renato Fiore an offer that was more compelling than 11 years of loyalty to me. What kind of offer? Elena asked. The only kind that turns someone who already has money, Matteo said. Safety. Conti offered Fiore a position inside the new structure, a guarantee. Once I was gone, and Conti's network absorbed everything, Fiore would survive the transition. Everyone else would not. Elena sat with that for a moment. He traded 11 years for a seat at someone else's table, she said. Men have traded more for less, Matteo said. How do you know all this from one phone call with Fortunato? Because Fortunato has been sitting on this information for 6 months, Matteo said, waiting for the right moment to use it. Last night's events made the moment. He was holding it as leverage, Elena said. Everyone holds everything as leverage, Matteo said. That's how this world functions. Does he know about the secondary mechanism, the 15th? He knows there is one. He doesn't know what it is. Matteo picked up his phone again. But he gave me a name. Someone in Conti's financial network who has been handling the mechanism's implementation. A woman named Vera Stahl. She operates out of Zurich, and according to Fortunato, she flew into New York 48 hours ago. Elena went still. She's already here, she said. She was here before the dinner at Tre Luci, Matteo said. She was here to oversee the activation. Last night was supposed to be the starting gun. My death would have triggered a sequence of financial transactions that Vera Stahl was in position to execute the moment confirmation came through. And when the confirmation didn't come, the sequence is still set, Matteo said. Stahl is still here, and if what you heard is correct, the mechanism activates on the 15th regardless. My death was the preferred trigger, but it wasn't the only one. Then what's the secondary trigger? Donovan asked. That's what we need to find out in the next... Matteo checked the time. 35 hours. Elena stood up. Both men looked at her. The restaurant, she said. 3 weeks ago, the man who mentioned the 15th, I didn't just hear the date. I heard something else. I dismissed it at the time because it didn't make sense in isolation. She paused, pulling the memory forward with the careful precision she always applied. He said, once the documentation transfers, the lock releases. Stahl handles the rest. Documentation transfers, Matteo said. What documentation? Donovan said. I don't know, Elena said. But the phrase he used in Italian was il trasferimento della firma, the transfer of the signature. Matteo was already looking at Donovan. The partnership documents, Donovan said. The Meridian papers, Matteo said. The 47 pages I was supposed to sign last night. If the documents contain something beyond the surface agreement. A buried clause, Matteo said. Something embedded in the legal language that once signed constitutes authorization for a financial transfer. Not a personal killing, a legal mechanism. Sign the documents and you legally authorize the transfer of assets you didn't know you were authorizing. Which means, Elena said, even if you survived last night, even if the warehouse failed, if you had signed those documents before you understood what they contained, the mechanism would already be activated. The killing was insurance, Matteo said. The documents were the actual weapon. The three of them stood in the kitchen of the safe house, with this understanding settling over them like something physical. Kessler, Matteo said, already dialing. Kessler needs to be looking at those documents right now. Every line, every embedded clause, every piece of legal language that could constitute an authorization of transfer. Kessler answered on the first ring. Matteo said 4 sentences. Kessler said he would call back in 20 minutes. He called back in 14. Berg, What Kessler found was elegant in the way that truly dangerous things are elegant. Clean, precise, designed to be invisible unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. On page 31 of the 47-page Meridian Partnership Agreement, embedded in a subsection of a clause related to cross-border asset management, was a provision authorizing the signatory, Matteo Valenti, to approve a scheduled transfer of what the document described as legacy infrastructure holdings in associated entities. The language was deliberately impenetrable. It was the kind of language that appears in complex international financial documents with enough regularity that a reader's eyes would move past it without stopping. What the language actually authorized, once decoded against the corporate registry of the entities named in the appendix, which Kessler found buried across 4 pages of appendix material in font that was technically within legal size requirements. But at the absolute minimum was the transfer of controlling interest in 7 Valenti Capital subsidiaries to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. The same Cayman Islands company that Fiore's intelligence packages had been flowing into. If you'd signed it, Kessler said, you would have legally authorized the transfer of 7 subsidiary entities to Conti's network. The transfer would have been executed by Vera Stahl within 48 hours under the authorization of your signature. And if I'm dead, Matteo said, who enforces the signature? The document includes a provision for electronic signature verification, Kessler said, which means a confirmed digital copy of your signature applied to the document by authorized personnel, meaning Fiore, who has administrative authority over your digital signature for business documents, would have the same legal standing. So they didn't actually need me to sign it in person, Matteo said. They needed you to authorize it in person because that's cleaner, Kessler said. But if you're dead and Fiore has your digital signature on file and the documents are already in the system, he can execute it anyway, Matteo said. Legally speaking, Kessler said with the careful tone of a man who had just confirmed something he very much wished he hadn't. Yes. The call ended. Matteo stood in the hallway. Elena had heard every word. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, and she was watching him with the expression she wore when she was processing something faster than she wanted to show. Fiore has your digital signature, she said. He has administrative authority over my business documentation, Matteo said. He has had it for 11 years. It was a practical decision. Someone needed to be able to move paperwork when I was unavailable. And now that authorization becomes the mechanism. Yes. So even if you stop Vera Stahl, if Fiore still has access to my signature authority and the documents are in the system, he can execute the transfer with or without her, Matteo said. We have to close both simultaneously, Elena said. Can you revoke his authorization? The moment I revoke it, he knows we know, Matteo said. He disappears. And if he disappears before we have everything documented, and before we have Stahl, he's a ghost, Elena said. And Conti still has everything Fiore already transferred. Yes. She folded her arms. So you need Fiore in position until you're ready to move on both simultaneously, she said. Within 35 hours. 34 now, she said. He looked at her. How are you so calm? He asked. It was the same question she had asked him that morning. He said it without mockery, with something closer to genuine curiosity. I'm not calm, she said. I'm focused. There's a difference. A slight pause. Someone told me that this morning. Something moved through his expression. Not quite a smile, the near equivalent of one. We need Fiore's location, he said, turning back toward the main room. I have it, Donovan said from behind them. He's at the Valenti Capital offices, arrived at 9 a.m. He's been in the building all morning. Acting normal, Matteo said. He doesn't know we know, Donovan said. He's waiting for confirmation that the warehouse succeeded. When he doesn't get it, he'll assume I'm dead and the confirmation is delayed, Matteo said. He'll wait as long as he can before initiating the backup plan. He won't want to move early, it's messier. How long will he wait? Knowing Fiore, Matteo said he'll hold through tonight, Tomorrow morning he starts getting nervous. By tomorrow afternoon, if he hasn't heard anything, he moves. That gives us tonight, Donovan said. That gives us tonight, Matteo agreed. He turned to Sandra. I need Vera Stahl's location. She's in New York. She came in 48 hours ago. She'll be staying somewhere with strong communications infrastructure, good encrypted connection, ability to execute financial transactions remotely. I'll find her, Sandra said, already working. I need it in 2 hours. I'll need 3. 2.5, he said. She said nothing, which meant yes. At 1:45, Elena found Matteo in the room at the end of the hall. He was standing with his back to the door, not on his phone, not reviewing documents, not doing any of the dozen things he had been doing in continuous motion since 6 a.m. Just standing. She had been going to tell him something. A detail she'd remembered, another fragment from the 3-year archive of overheard conversations that she'd been quietly sorting through all morning. But she stopped in the doorway. Sorry, she said. I can come back. No, he said without turning. Come in. She came in. She sat on the edge of the chair near the window. He turned around. He looked for the first time since she had met him 36 hours ago, like a man who was carrying the weight of what was actually happening, not collapsing under it. Matteo Valenti did not collapse. But the performance of complete control had stepped back slightly, and what was underneath it was something more human. Something she recognized. The look of a person who had loved something, a person, a belief, an idea of how the world was organized, and found out it was not what they thought. How many people do you actually trust? She asked. Not unkindly. He thought about it honestly. 3, he said. Donovan, Kessler, Sandra. And Fiore used to be on that list. He was at the top of it, Matteo said. She nodded. I lost everyone I trusted when I was 7 years old, she said. Both at once. My mother, my father, gone in the same accident. And then I went to live with my grandmother, who I barely knew, in a house that smelled like other people's history. She paused. And she was wonderful. She was one of the best people I have ever known. But it took me years to trust her. Because once you understand that the people you rely on can disappear without warning, the act of trusting someone becomes its own kind of fear. Matteo was looking at her. What changed it? He asked. What made you trust her? She never asked me to, Elena said. She just kept showing up, every day, consistent. She didn't promise she would always be there, she was too honest for that. She just was there. And eventually, I stopped waiting for her to vanish. A pause. Fiore showed up every day for 11 years, Matteo said. Yes, Elena said. And somewhere in there, someone else made a more compelling argument. She looked at him directly. That's not your failure. You can't outbid someone who's offering survival. The only currency that beats it is something stronger than self-interest. What is that? I'm not sure yet, she said. I'm still working on it. He sat down on the edge of the desk. Your grandmother's documents, he said. The ones you mentioned, the letters she left you. You said they were connected to a Sicilian family with ties to my father. Elena went still. It was the first time he had mentioned that. She had said it briefly the night before in the first hours at the safe house. She hadn't expected him to hold on to it. You remembered that, she said. I remember everything, he said. I have been waiting for the right moment to ask about it. She looked at him for a long moment. What do you know about a family called Amato? She said carefully. From a village outside Palermo, active in the 50s and 60s. Matteo was very still. The Amato family, he said. My father mentioned them once. I was maybe 12 years old. He said they were the old guard people who believed certain traditions about loyalty and conduct that the new generation didn't respect. He said the Amatos had been destroyed by someone they trusted, a betrayal from inside. He said it as a warning. He told me, never build something so important that one person can take it from the inside. My grandmother's maiden name, Elena said, was Amato. The room was completely silent. Her sister, my great-aunt, married a man named Conti, Elena said. In 1961, Emilio Conti. The silence had a new quality now. Your grandmother's family, Matteo said slowly, was destroyed by Emilio Conti. My grandmother believed so, Elena said. She never had proof. She left Sicily in 1963 because she was afraid. She came to America and she built a small life, and she raised me, and she taught me languages, and she told me very little about where she came from. But when she died, she left me a box, letters, documents, things she had gathered over 60 years from a distance trying to understand what happened to her family. What did they say? I read them when I was 22, Elena said, and I didn't understand most of it. Business references I couldn't contextualize, names I didn't recognize, dates that meant nothing to me. She paused. Until about a year ago when I started working at Tre Lucy and started hearing things, and some of the names from my grandmother's documents started appearing in the conversations around me. Which names? Meridian, she said. That name is in my grandmother's documents. Not as a company, it didn't exist then, but as a code word, a network designation. Conti's network used it internally 60 years ago and apparently still uses a version of it now. Matteo stood up. You've had documentation of Conti's network for over 60 years' worth of operations, he said. I have letters that mention a network my grandmother called Meridian, Elena said carefully. Whether they constitute legal documentation or are even fully interpretable. Elena. He stopped himself, took a breath. The documents your grandmother left you could potentially establish a pattern of operation that predates every current legal investigation into Conti's network. Pattern evidence, historical continuity. It could be the difference between a case that sticks and one that disappears. I know, she said. You've known this. I didn't know who to give them to, she said. I didn't know who to trust. I'm a waitress with a box of old letters in a language most people can't read. Who was I going to walk into a police station, a federal building? She looked at him steadily. I was waiting, like you, waiting until I understood enough to move in the right direction. He looked at her across the room. 11 years of Renato Fiore's betrayal. 60 years of Emilio Conti's construction. A network that had outlasted investigations, governments, and generations. A trap set with 47 pages of legal language and military-grade explosives. And at the center of the thing that might finally dismantle it, a woman with a grandmother from Palermo and a box of old letters and 3 years of perfect memory. Where are the documents? He said. My apartment, she said. We need them. I know, she said. I've been trying to tell you that for the last 20 minutes. Door. Getting the documents meant sending someone to Elena's apartment. Her apartment was in a building in Queens that she had lived in for 4 years, a small 2-bedroom that she split with a rotating series of reasonable roommates, and which contained in the back of her closet behind a winter coat she wore twice a year a fireproof document box that her grandmother had given her the year before she died. The problem was exposure. If Conti's people had traced Elena to Tre Lucy, and by now they had her apartment was a known address. Sending anyone there risked either walking into surveillance or alerting them that Elena was still active. I'll go, Elena said. No, Matteo said. Nobody else knows what they're looking for. You can describe it. It's a fireproof box with a combination I have not written down anywhere, she said. The combination is a date, a specific date in Sicilian calendar format. My grandmother taught it to me when she gave me the box, and I have never told another person what it is. There is no description that substitutes for me being there. Matteo looked at Donovan. Donovan's expression said, she has a point, and I don't love it. We survey the building first, Donovan said. Full perimeter assessment. If there's anyone watching it, we abort. Agreed, Matteo said. If the perimeter is clean? I go in, I get the box, I come out, Elena said. 20 minutes maximum. 15, Donovan said. My closet is organized, she said. 15. The perimeter assessment took 40 minutes. Donovan ran it himself with 2 people Elena had not been introduced to, but who moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this kind of work for a long time. They walked the block from 3 different angles. They checked the building entrance, the side alley, the parking area. Clean. No surveillance they could identify, which didn't mean nothing was there. It meant nothing was visible. But given the timeline, 30 hours now counting down the calculated risk was manageable. Elena went in. Matteo was in the car outside with Donovan and one of the 2 others. He was not built for waiting. Elena had been in the building for 3 minutes, and he was already doing the thing he did with his phone, turning it over in his hand, a small repetitive motion that was the only outward sign of internal tension she had identified in him. "She'll be fine," Donovan said. "I know," Matteo said. 4 minutes? 5. At 6 minutes and 40 seconds, Elena came through the lobby door with a fireproof box under her arm, and her coat open, and the expression of someone who had moved very fast and was performing calm over the top of adrenaline. She got in the car. She put the box on her lap. She said, "There's a man on the 4th floor who I'm fairly certain was watching the hallway from his doorway. Probably nothing. He's a retired postal worker who is generally very nosy. But you should know." "Which apartment?" Donovan said. 412, she said. "His name is Gerald. He waters my plants when I travel. I'm 92% sure he's harmless." They moved. Back at the safe house, Elena opened the box. The combination was, as she had said, a date in Sicilian calendar format, her grandmother's birthday, rendered in the old way, the way the village kept dates before standardization, a sequence that would mean nothing to anyone who didn't know where to look. The box opened. Inside, 47 years of patience. Letters in her grandmother's hand, tight, precise handwriting in Sicilian dialect, addressing an unknown recipient who appeared to be a contact her grandmother had maintained across decades. Letters that had been written and sealed and never sent because there was no one to send them to who could be trusted. Documents, some original, some clearly copied by hand, the photocopying technology of the time being unavailable to a woman in exile who had gathered information at great personal risk. Photographs old and carefully preserved of people Elena recognized from names in the letters. And at the very bottom of the box, in a separate sealed envelope with Elena's name on it, in her grandmother's handwriting, a letter dated 3 weeks before her grandmother died. Elena had read it when she opened the box at 22. She had read it twice, since once at 30, once at 35, when she felt like she was old enough to understand what she hadn't understood before. She handed the letter to Matteo. He took it. He read it slowly. His face as he read was very still. When he finished, he looked up. "Your grandmother knew my father," he said. Not an accusation. Barely even a statement. More like the sound of something very old finally arriving at its destination. "She knew him from before," Elena said. "They grew up in the same world. Different families, same territory. She trusted him in a way she trusted almost no one else from that time. She gave him copies of some of these documents," Matteo said. "Yes. He kept them. She believed he did. She didn't know what he did with them. He didn't use them," Matteo said. "He died before—" He stopped, set the letter down carefully, picked up the external envelope and looked at the date. He looked at Elena. 3 weeks before she died," he said. "Your grandmother wrote this." "Yes. She told you to find the right moment," Matteo said. "She told you the documents would mean more to the right person than to any official investigation. She told you—" He stopped again, looked at the letter one more time. "Find the person who lost what we lost. He will understand what these mean. He will know what to do with them." Elena said nothing. "She meant my father," Matteo said. "Your father was already gone," Elena said. "She wrote that letter, and then she died, and I had a box of documents I didn't fully understand, and a description of a dead man who would have known what to do with them." She paused. "And then I started working at Treluci, and the names started appearing, and I started understanding the context, and I started to think maybe it doesn't have to be your father. Maybe it can be his son." Matteo was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not in 36 hours of watching him manage crisis after crisis with the controlled efficiency of a man who had been trained since birth to never be overwhelmed. You came to Tre Lucy on purpose, he said. Elena met his eyes. Tre Lucy was the restaurant I could get a job at that had the right clientele, she said. Yes, I went there on purpose. I spent 8 months learning everything I could about who ate there and what they talked about, and whether the connections in my grandmother's documents were still active. And then I walked in. And then you walked in, she said. And I spent 6 weeks watching you. And then the men from Meridian arrived, and I heard them in Sicilian, and I had about 4 seconds to decide whether to act on 3 years of careful patience or let the moment pass. Why did you decide to act? Because my grandmother spent 60 years being patient, Elena said, and she died before she ever got her answer. And I decided I was not going to do the same thing. The room held this. Donovan was very still in the corner. Sandra had stopped typing. Matteo looked at Elena Russo, the invisible waitress with the $40 coat, and the grandmother from Palermo, and the box of 60-year-old documents, and the 3 years of perfect memory, and the 4-second decision that had changed the shape of everything. You planned this, he said, not with anger, with something closer to astonishment. I planned to be in a position to act, she said. I couldn't plan what would happen next. You can't plan people. You can only be ready when the moment arrives. She held his gaze without flinching. Are you angry? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. I'm trying to understand what I'm looking at. You're looking at someone who had everything her family built taken away, she said, and who spent a very long time figuring out how to get it back. She paused. Sound familiar? He was quiet. Then Sandra spoke from the corner, her voice cutting through the moment with the precision of a woman who had excellent timing and no patience for prolonged silences when there was work to be done. Vera Stahl, she said. I have her. Everyone turned. She's in a service department on the Upper West Side, Sandra said. The lease is under a shell company, but the communications pattern out of that address for the last 48 hours is consistent with someone running financial operations remotely. She's made 11 encrypted calls in 2 days. 3 of them to a number that traces back to a server connected to the Cayman Islands company. Can you get into her communications? Matteo said. I already am, Sandra said. And there's something you need to see. She turned the laptop. On the screen was a partial decryption of an encrypted message sent from Stahl's location at 11:43 a.m., while Matteo had been on the phone with Fortunato, while Elena had been pulling the memory of the restaurant forward, while the 35-hour clock had been running. The message said, primary failed, secondary confirmed, execute on schedule regardless, the documentation transfer proceeds as planned, Fiore confirms access. Matteo read it. Elena read it over his shoulder. Fiore already knows the primary failed, Elena said. He's confirmed to Stahl that he has the access to execute the signature transfer. Which means he's already decided to move, Matteo said. He's not waiting for tomorrow morning, Donovan said. He's waiting for the signal from Stahl. When does she plan to give it? Matteo said to Sandra. Sandra pointed to the timestamp on the message and a second partial message below it. She hasn't given a time yet, Sandra said, but she's asking Fiore to confirm system access by 6 p.m. today. Matteo looked at the time, 3:17 p.m. We have 2 hours and 43 minutes before Fiore confirms access to Stahl, Matteo said. Once that confirmation goes, they'll move fast. We need to be ahead of it. How? Donovan said. Elena spoke before Matteo did. You need Fiore to confirm something that isn't what he thinks he's confirming, she said. Both men looked at her. You need to give him something that looks exactly like what he's waiting for a green light from his end, but actually locks him out rather than in. Give him an action that appears to be cooperation, but is actually the mechanism of his own removal. A pause. She means bait, Donovan said. I mean precision, Elena said. Matteo looked at her for a moment. Kessler, he said. He was already dialing. Because Elena Russo had just described in one precise paragraph exactly what needed to happen. And the woman who had planned 3 years to be in the right place at the right moment had now somehow also planned the way out. "This isn't over," Matteo said, phone to his ear. "No," Elena said. "But it's closer." Outside, the city moved through its afternoon without knowing what was happening inside a safe house on a quiet street, without knowing that 60 years of patience and 2 days of crisis were converging on a window of less than 3 hours. Somewhere uptown, Vera Stahl sat in a serviced apartment running financial operations. Somewhere in the Valenti Capital offices, Renato Fiore waited for a confirmation that was not coming. And somewhere in Palermo, an old man named Emilio Conti was about to discover that the network he had spent 6 decades building had a crack in it. A crack that had been made by a woman no one had ever thought to notice. Kessler arrived at the safe house at 4 p.m. with 2 associates Elena had never seen before, and a laptop that he set on the kitchen table with the specific care of someone transporting something both fragile and critical. He was a tall man, Kessler thin, in the way that people who work very long hours for very many years become thin with reading glasses. He kept removing and replacing, and wire gray hair that suggested he had been doing this particular kind of work since before it had a proper name. He looked at Elena once when he came in, assessed her in approximately 3 seconds, and then spoke directly to Matteo. "The documents are extraordinary," he said. He meant the grandmother's documents. Sandra had photographed everything from the fireproof box and sent the images to Kessler 2 hours ago. 60 years of operational continuity, Kessler continued. The Meridian Network designation appears in correspondence dated 1961, which predates every formal investigation we're aware of by at least a decade. Your grandmother. He glanced at Elena, corrected himself slightly. The documents establish a pattern that current investigators have never been able to pin down because they've only been looking at the last 20 years. Can they be used? Matteo asked. Not in a criminal proceeding directly, Kessler said. The chain of custody is complicated by the fact that they were held privately for 60 years. But as foundation documentation for a civil case or as supporting material for a federal investigation that has its own independent evidence, they are potentially decisive. He paused. The question is who we give them to and when. After tonight, Matteo said. Everything after tonight. Kessler nodded. He understood sequencing. He had always understood sequencing. Then let's talk about tonight, he said. Walk me through what you need. What Matteo needed was something that required Kessler's particular expertise, the ability to construct a legal and financial architecture on very short notice that looked exactly like something else. The plan was this. Fiore was waiting to confirm system access to Vera Stahl by 6 p.m. That confirmation was the signal that would allow Stahl to proceed with the financial transfer, the execution of the buried clause in the Meridian documents using Matteo's digital signature under Fiore's administrative authority. What Matteo intended was to give Fiore what appeared to be everything he was waiting for and have it be nothing of the kind. Kessler's job was to construct a false version of the Valenti Capital administrative system. A mirror. Identical in appearance to the actual system accessible through Fiore's normal credentials containing the exact documents and authorization pathways he expected to find, but routed through Sandra's monitoring infrastructure rather than the real system. When Fiore logged in to confirm access, he would be logging into the mirror. Every action he took would be visible. Every document he touched, every authorization he attempted, every communication he sent from within the system would be captured in real time. And critically, the mirror's confirmation pathway, when Fiore sent his green light to Stahl, would feed into a dead channel. Stahl would receive a confirmation. She would begin to execute. And the account she would be executing against was not a Valenti Capital account. It was a shell constructed by Kessler, in the last 2 hours, empty legal, real enough to pass a rapid verification, and connected to nothing. How long to build the mirror? Matteo asked. Sandra and I have been building it since 2 o'clock, Kessler said. We'll be ready by 5:30. That gives us 30 minutes before Fiore's confirmation window. Enough, Sandra said from across the room. Barely, but enough. Matteo looked at his team. These three people, Kessler, Sandra, Donovan, who had been in various configurations around him for years, who were now operating with the focused intensity of people who understood that what they were doing in the next 2 hours would determine not just tonight, but everything that came after. He had built something, he thought. Not just Valenti Capital. Something around it. People who showed up. People who were still there. He thought of Fiore. He pushed the thought away. There's a secondary problem, Donovan said. Stall. Once the mirror confirmation lands and she starts executing against the shell account, she'll know within minutes that something is wrong. The account won't behave the way a real Valenti Capital account behaves. She'll abort. How many minutes? Matteo asked. 8 to 12, Sandra said. Depending on how sophisticated her verification process is. So we have an 8 to 12-minute window between Stall receiving the false confirmation and Stall realizing it's false, Matteo said. In that window we need to be in position to move on both of them simultaneously. Fiore at the office, Stall at the Upper West Side apartment. 2 separate teams, Donovan said. 2 separate teams, Matteo agreed. Moving at exactly the same moment. If one moves before the other, they communicate and abort, Elena said from the kitchen table. Everyone looked at her. If Fiore is taken first, he finds a way to warn Stall. If Stall is taken first, her systems automatically trigger a failsafe to Fiore. They'll have planned for this. People who construct this kind of operation don't leave one thread without a backup. She paused. You have to cut both at the same time, to the minute. She's right, Donovan said. I know, Matteo said. Which means the timing has to be perfect, Kessler said. The false confirmation goes to Stall. The moment she begins executing the moment, we have evidence of her attempting the transfer both teams move. Not before. We need her action on record. Agreed, Matteo said. And Fiore needs to be in the act of using the mirror system when his team moves, Kessler said. We need him captured in the process, not before he logs in, not after he's already sent the confirmation in the act. Then the timing of the mirror confirmation to Stall and the timing of our teams moving on both of them need to be synchronized to a window of less than 60 seconds, Donovan said. 45 seconds, Sandra said. I can hold it to 45. Everyone looked at her. Trust me, she said, and went back to her laptop. At 4:47, Elena's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She stared at it. The phone rang 3 times. She looked at Matteo. Answer it, he said after a half-second's assessment. She answered. A voice she had never heard before said in Italian, Tell Valenti that we know about the safe house. He has until midnight to stand down or the secondary mechanism executes early. The call ended. The room went completely still. Elena set the phone on the table. They know about this location, she said. How long ago did they find it? Donovan was already moving. The call was from a burner, Sandra said, phone already in hand. I can't trace the origin fast enough to be useful. She looked up. But they didn't say they were coming here. They said midnight. That's a negotiating call, not a tactical one. They want Matteo to stand down, Elena said. Which means they're aware the plan is in trouble. They know the warehouse failed. They probably know Matteo is alive and operational. They're trying to buy time. Or they're trying to spook us into moving too early, Donovan said. Into making a mistake. Either way, we're not standing down, Matteo said. They'll move the timeline, Donovan said. If they think we're close. They can't move it before Fiore confirms access, Sandra said. The system requires his authentication. It's not something Stall can execute alone. They're bluffing about early execution. Can you be certain? Matteo asked. 90%, Sandra said. And the other 10%? She met his eyes. We live with it, she said. Matteo nodded. He looked at Elena. You handled that well, he said. Simply. Not effusively, just an acknowledgement. I've been in difficult conversations before, she said. Not like that. No, she admitted. Not like that, but the principle is the same. Don't let them see you recalibrate. Stay level. Let them think they've landed something when they haven't. Your grandmother teach you that too. She taught me everything worth knowing, Elena said. A pause. We need to move the timeline up, Donovan said. If they know about this location, we can't wait until 6. We move now. Get both teams in position now. Execute the mirror confirmation early and move on them the moment it goes out. The mirror isn't ready, Kessler said. How close? 40 minutes, Sandra said. Can you do it in 25? Sandra did not answer immediately. She looked at her screen. She ran something through her mind that took about 8 seconds. Yes, she said. But Kessler and I are not speaking to anyone for the next 25 minutes. Then no one speaks to you, Matteo said. The kitchen became an island of silence around Sandra and Kessler, who worked with the focused speed of people who had just been given less time and more pressure and had chosen to respond by becoming very, very precise. Matteo and Donovan moved to the hallway. Elena followed. What do you need from me for the next phase? She said. I need you to stay here, Matteo said. And if they come here, there will be 2 people in the building, Donovan said. You'll be with them. You don't go anywhere. You don't open any door. You don't make any calls. And what happens to the documents? Matteo looked at the fireproof box sitting on the kitchen counter where Elena had left it. They stay with you, he said. They don't leave this room until I'm back. And if you're not back? The question was direct, and Elena asked it the way she asked everything, without flinching from it, without softening it with social language. Matteo looked at her. Then give the box to Kessler, he said. He knows what to do with it. All right, she said. She held his gaze for a moment. Come back, she said. It was simply said. No performance, no drama. He held her gaze in return. I intend to, he said. At 5:14 p.m., Sandra looked up from her laptop. Mirror is live, she said. 24 minutes. 1 minute ahead of the revised target. Kessler exhaled slowly. The false confirmation pathway is active, Sandra said. When Fiore logs in, everything he sees is the mirror. Every action he takes is captured. The moment he sends the green light to stall, it feeds to her through what looks like the real channel. Her receiving system will verify it as authentic. Donovan, Matteo said. Teams are in position, Donovan said. He had his phone in his hand. Both teams, 4 people at the Valenti Capitol building, 3 people outside Stahl's Upper West Side apartment were stationed and waiting. On your word. We wait for Fiore to log in, Matteo said. The moment he does, I want confirmation. The moment he initiates the confirmation to Stahl, both teams move. Sandra calls it. Understood, Sandra said. The room waited. 5:19, 5:23. At 5:26, Sandra said, He's logging in. No one moved. He's in the mirror, she said. He's navigating to the document authorization pathway. He's found the Meridian files. A pause. He's opening the signature transfer protocol. Elena, standing against the wall with the fireproof box on the counter behind her, felt her hands go very still. Matteo was at the kitchen table. His face was completely neutral. He's entering the authorization, Sandra said. She stopped. Her eyes moved across her screen. Something shifted in her expression. He stopped. What? Donovan said. He stopped mid-authorization. He's not proceeding. Sandra's hands moved fast across the keyboard. He's looking at something. He's running a verification check on the system. He's suspicious, Kessler said quietly. Can he detect the mirror? Matteo asked. Not with a standard check, Sandra said. But if he's running a deep system verification. Can he? Matteo said. Sandra's hands stopped. There is one signature that I couldn't fully replicate, she said. A back-end timestamp on the administrative server. If he's running a check sophisticated enough to see the back-end, Sandra. 30% chance he sees it, she said. 70 he doesn't. 30 seconds of silence. Elena counted them. At 31 seconds, Sandra exhaled. He's proceeding, she said. He resumed the authorization. He's completing the signature transfer. A pause. It's sent. Confirmation is live. Stahl is receiving it now. Teams move, Matteo said. Donovan was already on the phone. Chai. What happened in the next 11 minutes would take much longer than 11 minutes to fully understand. At the Valenti Capitol building on the 43rd floor, 4 people entered the building through 2 separate access points simultaneously. They moved through the floor with the specific knowledge of people who had studied the layout in advance. Renato Fiore was at his desk. He had just sent the confirmation and was watching his screen with the focused attention of a man waiting for a process to complete. He heard the door behind him. He turned. The 4 people were already in the room. What he said in the first 2 seconds was nothing. He simply looked at the 4 people, and then he looked at the door behind them, and then he looked back at his screen where the mirror system was showing him a transaction in progress that was not actually in progress at all. And he understood. Not everything and not immediately. But enough. He said one word in Italian, a profanity, almost to himself. Then he put his hands on the desk. Because Renato Fiore, whatever else he was, had been in this world for 23 years, and he understood that the particular configuration of people and circumstances currently arranged around him did not have a version where he made it worse for himself by resisting. He put his hands on the desk and he said, "How long have you known?" The team leader looked at him and said, "Long enough." Across the city on the Upper West Side, the timing landed within 17 seconds of the office team's entry. Vera Stahl heard the knock at the apartment door and made the mistake of opening it, which suggested, as Donovan would later observe, that either she had been expecting someone or she had not yet understood that the operation had failed, because a woman of her experience and caution should not have opened a door at this moment, unless she had no reason to believe the door held a threat. She opened it. 3 people were in the apartment within 20 seconds. Stahl did not say a profanity. Stahl said nothing at all for a very long time. She looked at the people in her apartment with the expression of someone running through options very rapidly and discarding each of them at the speed of confirmation that there were no viable options to select. Then she sat down. And she said, "I want to make a deal." Gay. Donovan called Matteo at 5:41. "Done," he said. "Both secured. No injuries. Stahl is asking for a deal immediately." Matteo was standing in the kitchen. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. "Is she?" he said. "She's already talking. She has information about Conti's network she claims is worth the conversation." "Let her talk," Matteo said. "Record everything. Nobody agrees to anything until I'm there." "Understood." "Fiore." "What did he say?" A pause. "He asked how long we'd known," Donovan said. "He looked at the screen. He understood the mirror before we explained it. He put his hands down and he said..." Another pause. "He said, 'Tell Matteo I'm sorry.' Those exact words." The kitchen was very quiet. "Did he say anything else?" "No," Donovan said. "Just that." Matteo ended the call. He stood with the phone at his side. Elena was watching him from the other side of the kitchen. She did not say anything. She let him have the moment that it was the particular kind of moment that doesn't have a proper name when something you hoped wouldn't be true is confirmed to be true, and the relief of knowing and the grief of knowing arrive at exactly the same time, and you can't separate them. "He said he's sorry," Matteo said. "I heard," Elena said. 11 years. "Yes." He set the phone on the counter. He looked at the fireproof box behind Elena. "Your grandmother spent 60 years waiting for this," he said. "She didn't live to see it," Elena said. The words were level, but something moved through them. "No," Matteo said. "But you did." She looked at him for a long moment. "We did," she said. They arrived at the Valenti Capitol building at 6:15. Matteo walked through the lobby with the particular quality of presence that made people in the lobby straighten slightly without knowing why. Elena walked beside him, not behind, not to one side, but beside with the fireproof box under one arm, and the composure of someone who had decided somewhere between the kitchen and the car that the time for watching from the margins was finished. Fiore was in a secured conference room on the 42nd floor. Matteo stopped outside the door. He put his hand on the door handle. He stood there for a moment. Elena, standing beside him, said nothing. She did not fill the silence with reassurance or advice. She simply stood there, present, letting him have whatever he needed to have before he walked through. He looked at her. "You don't have to come in," he said. "I know," she said. He pushed the door open. Renato Fiore was seated at the conference table. His jacket was on the back of the chair. His tie was loosened. He was 61 years old, and in the hour since his capture, he appeared to have aged in the way that people age when the thing holding them together stops holding. He looked up when Matteo entered. He did not look away. That at least Matteo noted. 11 years and betrayal and everything it implied, and Fiore still looked at him directly. It was the one thing about this moment that Matteo had not been certain of. "Renato," Matteo said. He sat down across from him. Elena sat 2 chairs away against the wall. Donovan stood near the door. "Matteo," Fiore said. His voice was steady, the voice of a man who had made his choices and was not going to pretend otherwise. "Tell me when it started," Matteo said. Fiore looked at the table, then back up. 26 months ago, he said. Conti made contact through an intermediary, a meeting in Rome. He told me, he paused. He told me that what was coming was inevitable, that Valenti Capital's structure, the way it operated the territory it controlled, it was incompatible with the new architecture he was building. He said I had 2 choices, be part of what came after or be part of what was removed. He threatened you, Matteo said. He informed me, Fiore said. There's a difference. He wasn't angry. He wasn't demanding. He was simply describing reality as he saw it, the way a man describes weather. A pause. And I believed him. You believed him over 23 years of being in this world and 11 years of building something with me, Matteo said. I believed that Conti was right about the inevitability, Fiore said. I didn't agree with him about everything. I didn't want... He stopped, started again. I didn't want you dead, Matteo. That was not part of my negotiation with him. He told me the elimination was necessary for the transition. I told him I would not actively participate in that part. But you didn't stop it, Matteo said. No, Fiore said. You didn't warn me. No. The word was very small. Because you thought he was right, Matteo said. You thought it was inevitable, so warning me would have only delayed it, Fiore said. Yes, that's what I told myself. He looked down. It's a very comfortable thing to tell yourself, that the outcome is inevitable. It removes the weight of the choice. Does it? Matteo said. Fiore looked up. No, he said quietly. As it turns out, it doesn't. Elena against the wall was very still. She was watching Fiore with the careful attention she gave to everything. Not with anger, not with sympathy, but with the precise attention of someone who was listening for the truth underneath the words. There's something else, Fiore said. Matteo waited. Conti knows about the documents, Fiore said. The grandmother's documents. He's known for a long time not about this specific woman, but that someone in Elena Amato's line had preserved materials from 1961. He's been looking for them for 20 years. He glanced briefly at Elena. He knew they existed. He didn't know where they were. He knows now, Matteo said. When the primary plan failed last night, Fiore said, he activated a secondary intelligence sweep. He was trying to understand what went wrong. He found I don't know how Sandra would need to trace the exact pathway he found reference to Trey Lucy and a staff member connected to the Amato family name. Elena did not move. He doesn't have the documents, Fiore said. He doesn't know exactly what they contain, but he knows they exist and he knows Elena has them. And Conti... He paused. Those documents are more dangerous to him than anything else we're discussing tonight. More dangerous than the mirror. More dangerous than Stahl's arrest. If the historical record of the Meridian Network from 1961 becomes part of a federal case, he loses everything, Matteo said. Not just the current operation, the entire 60-year structure. Yes, Fiore said. Which means Elena is now a higher priority target than I am, Matteo said. The words landed in the room. Matteo did not look at Elena. He kept his eyes on Fiore. Is that what you were told? He said. That's what I understood, Fiore said. Conti didn't say it directly, but the change in focus after last night, the intelligence sweep, the priority reassignment, it was clear. Matteo stood. He moved toward the door. He said to Donovan quietly, "Get Elena out of this building. Now. Use the secondary exit." "I can hear you," Elena said from behind him. He turned. She was standing. "I know," he said. "I'm not leaving." "Elena, the documents are the leverage," she said. "Taking me out of the building doesn't change that. Conti knows they exist. Hiding them doesn't make them more useful, it makes them more vulnerable. If something happens to me and the documents are in a safe house somewhere, they disappear into a legal process that takes years." She looked at Matteo with complete steadiness. "The documents have to go on record tonight, not tomorrow, not through a process that takes months. Tonight." "You're talking about going to federal law enforcement," Matteo said. "I've been talking about it since I was 22 years old," she said. "I just didn't have enough to make it work. Now I do." "You don't know who in federal enforcement can be trusted." "You do," she said. "Or Kessler does. Or someone in this building does. You've been operating in this world for 30 years, and there are people on the other side of the line who want Conti as badly as you need him stopped." She held his gaze. "This is what the documents are for. This is what my grandmother preserved them for. Not to give us negotiating leverage, not to hold over someone's head, to end it." Matteo looked at her. "If we do this," he said carefully, "it changes everything about how the next stage operates. The federal involvement means..." "It means Conti can't make it disappear," Elena said. "That's exactly the point." A pause. "She's right," Kessler said from the doorway. He had appeared there quietly the way Kessler did everything without announcing himself, without taking up space he hadn't been invited to take. "I have a contact. DOJ. She's been building a case on the edges of Conti's network for 4 years, without being able to find the historical thread that ties it together. What's in that box?" He nodded toward the fireproof document box, which Elena still held under her arm. "Is the thread." Matteo was quiet for a moment. He looked at Fiore. "You said Conti considers the documents the primary threat," he said. "Yes," Fiore said. "More dangerous to him than anything Stahl can say." "Much more." Matteo looked back at Elena. She stood in the conference room of the building that bore his family's name, holding a box of letters written by a woman 60 years ago, in a language most people in this city had never heard, with the expression of someone who had been patient for a very long time, and had decided the patience was finished. "How long would your DOJ contact need?" Matteo asked Kessler. "An hour to reach her," Kessler said. "Another hour to review the materials. If they're as strong as I believe..." He paused. "She can file for emergency authorization tonight. Conti's U.S. financial operations get frozen by morning." "That's 8 hours," Matteo said. "Yes." "And in 8 hours, Conti knows we've moved." "He'll know by morning regardless," Elena said. "The question is whether morning finds him frozen or free to respond." Matteo thought for exactly the amount of time it took him to make an irreversible decision, which in his experience was not as long as people thought it was. "Call your contact," he told Kessler. Kessler was already moving. Matteo looked at Donovan. "I need 4 people with Elena from this moment until morning. Not rotating. The same 4. Nobody in, nobody out that isn't cleared directly through you. Done, Donovan said. And Fiore? Matteo looked at him one last time. Fiore was watching him with the expression of a man who understood that this was the last conversation they would have in any version of their previous relationship. Whatever came next would be different. Whatever Fiore was about to become cooperating witness. Consequence of his choices, something else entirely. The thing he had been for 11 years was over. I'll cooperate fully, Fiore said. Whatever you need, whatever the process requires. I know, Matteo said. That's what I expected from you, even now. He moved toward the door. He stopped. Without turning around, he said, The thing you told yourself about inevitability. I understand why you reached for it. I understand the logic. Fiore was very still. But nothing was inevitable, Matteo said. Not one piece of any of it. Everything that happened tonight, everything that failed, happened because a woman nobody noticed chose not to stay silent. That's not inevitability. That's the opposite of it. He walked out of the room. Elena followed. In the hallway outside, walking toward the elevators where Kessler was already on his phone, and Donovan was moving people into position, she fell into step beside Matteo. That was well said, she told him. Don't sound surprised, he said. I'm not surprised, she said. I'm noting it. He glanced at her sideways. Your grandmother would have liked tonight, he said. Elena considered this. She would have liked what tonight is becoming, she said. She was very particular about the difference between the effort and the result. Smart woman, he said. The smartest I ever knew, Elena said. Until recently. He looked at her. She held his look with the level steadiness that had characterized everything she'd done since the moment she leaned across a table and whispered 3 words in Sicilian. We're not done yet, he said. No, she agreed. But we're close. The elevator opened. They stepped in. The doors closed. And somewhere in Palermo, Emilio Conti, who had built 60 years of careful architecture and had spent 2 decades looking for a box of letters he had never been able to find, was about to learn that patience in the end belongs to whoever uses it for the right purpose. Kessler's contact at the Department of Justice was a woman named Agent Patricia Howe. She answered her phone at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening, without any indication that this was an unusual hour to receive a call that would change the direction of an investigation she had been running for 4 years. She listened to Kessler for 3 minutes and 40 seconds without interrupting. When he finished, she said 2 words, I'm coming. She arrived at the Valenti Capitol building at 7:53 with a colleague and a hard drive, and the specific expression of someone who had been waiting for a particular door to open for a very long time and was now standing in front of it, trying not to move too fast. Elena met her in the conference room on the 42nd floor. She set the fireproof box on the table. She opened it. Agent Howe looked at the contents for a long moment without touching anything. Then she put on a pair of examination gloves. She lifted the first letter carefully, the way you lift something that has survived longer than it should have, that has traveled farther than it was ever meant to travel. She read. She was fluent in Italian, Kessler had mentioned. Her Sicilian was limited, but Elena sat across from her and translated in a low, even voice, translating her grandmother's handwriting, her grandmother's careful, precise sentences, her grandmother's 60 years of documentation into language that a federal investigator could understand and use and build into something that would hold. Matteo sat at the far end of the table and said nothing. He watched Elena translate. He watched Agent Howe's expression move through several distinct phases. Professional assessment, then something sharper and more urgent, then the very specific stillness of a person who has just confirmed something they suspected was true, but needed physical evidence to establish. At 8:21, Agent Howe set down the letter she was reading and looked at Elena directly. How long have you had these? She asked. I've had the box since I was 22, Elena said. I've understood what they meant for about 2 years. Why didn't you come forward earlier? Elena considered how to answer this honestly. Because I didn't have enough context to make them useful, she said. And because I needed to be certain that the person I brought them to could actually do something with them. That the case wouldn't disappear into a process that went nowhere. A pause. I needed to know the evidence would land somewhere it couldn't be buried. Agent Howe looked at her for a moment, or for a keyed. Miss Russo, she said, what's in this box combined with the testimony from Vera Stahl and Renato Fiore and the mirror operation documentation from tonight? She paused. This isn't a case. This is a complete architecture. This is everything we have been trying to build for 4 years from the outside, and it's all here assembled with 60 years of continuity. My grandmother assembled it, Elena said. Your grandmother? Agent Howe stopped, looked at the letters, looked back at Elena. Your grandmother built a case from exile, from a distance of 6,000 miles over 60 years in a language most people couldn't read about an organization most people refused to acknowledge existed. She paused. That is, I don't have the right word for what that is. Patience, Elena said. She called it patience. Agent Howe was quiet for a moment. We need to move tonight, she said. Emergency authorization. The financial freeze on Conti's U.S. operations needs to be in place before the European markets open in the morning. Once we have that, once his liquidity is cut, his ability to respond operationally becomes severely limited. How long for the authorization? Matteo said from the end of the table. 2 hours, Howe said. Maybe less. I need to make some calls. Make them, Matteo said. She made them. The next 2 hours were the strangest 2 hours Elena had experienced in a sequence of days that had contained a significant number of strange hours. The building ran on its own rhythm around them. The normal evening operations of Valenti Capital, continuing on the floors above and below, people working late elevators, moving phones, ringing the machinery of a legitimate business, doing what legitimate businesses do while on the 42nd floor. Something else entirely was being assembled. Agent Howe worked from the conference room. Her colleague, a quiet man named Reyes, who spoke only when necessary and moved with the efficiency of someone whose job was to make processes happen fast, had a laptop open and was running authorization requests through DOJ channels, while simultaneously coordinating with a financial crimes unit Matteo had not previously known existed. Sandra was in contact with Howe's technical team, remotely transferring the mirror operation data and the Stahl communications intercepts in encrypted packages that would form the digital backbone of the case. Kessler was on the phone with 3 different people in 3 different offices, laying the legal groundwork for what came next. Donovan was managing the physical situation. Fiore, in one room, the 4-person protection detail around Elena, the building security briefed and locked down. In the middle of all of this, Elena sat in the hallway outside the conference room on a chair that was not designed for comfort with the fireproof box on her lap because she had not been willing to leave it on the table, and she was very still. Matteo came and sat beside her. He did not bring anything with him. No phone in his hand, no documents to review. He just sat down in the chair beside hers, which was also not designed for comfort, and leaned back against the wall. They sat like that for a moment. She would have wanted to be here, Elena said. Not sadly, simply. Your grandmother. She spent 60 years building toward this, Elena said. And then she died 3 years before it happened. That's the part I can't fully make peace with. Maybe she knew you would finish it, Matteo said. She hoped I would, Elena said. The letter she left me, she didn't say do this. She didn't instruct me. She said she wrote... Elena stopped, cleared her throat once quickly. She wrote, I trust you to know when the time is right. You have always known things before you knew them. That is the Amato gift. Don't waste it on silence. Matteo was quiet. She sounds like someone I would have wanted to know, he said. She would have taken you apart in about 4 minutes, Elena said. Politely. She was always polite about it. I believe that, he said. A pause. What happens after tonight? Elena asked. To you. To Valenti Capital. If the case goes forward, if Conti's operations are frozen, your relationship to all of that changes. Yes, he said. Are you ready for what that means? He thought about it honestly. "I've been building toward something for 30 years, he said. And tonight I'm discovering that the thing I was building toward may need to become something different. Not smaller, not dismantled, but different." A pause. "I'm not sure if that's loss or opportunity." "My grandmother would have said it's both," Elena said. "And that the people who survive the difference are the ones who understand that." He looked at her sideways. "What would you say?" She looked at him directly. "I'd say you've spent 30 years being afraid that loyalty doesn't exist," she said. "And tonight, you found out the fear was legitimate, and the hope was also legitimate, and they were both true at the same time." She paused. "That's not a simple thing to stand inside." He was quiet for a moment. "You're very direct," he said. "You've mentioned that before," she said. "I'm noting it again. I spent 3 years being invisible to people who had power," she said. "I'm done editing myself for someone else's comfort." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Good." Just that. One word. She looked at him. He looked at the wall across from them. "Good," he said again more quietly, and something shifted between them in that hallway, not dramatically, not with any of the performance that lesser moments sometimes demanded. Something simply moved. The way light moves when a cloud shifts. The way a room feels different after a window is opened that has been closed for a long time. Neither of them named it. Neither of them needed to. At 9:44 p.m., Agent Howe opened the conference room door. "Authorization confirmed," she said. The financial freeze on Emilio Conti's U.S. connected operations would take effect at midnight Eastern Time, which was 6 a.m. in Palermo. By the time Conti's financial advisors reached their offices on Friday morning, the accounts would be locked. The transactions Vera Stahl had attempted to execute were already flagged and reversed before they cleared. The 7 Valenti Capital subsidiaries that had been targeted by the buried clause were confirmed as unaffected. The Mirror had held the shell account had absorbed the attempt, and the real assets had never moved. "Stahl is in federal custody as of 20 minutes ago," Howe continued. "She's cooperating at a level that suggests she understood the moment she was taken that her best option was to be the most useful person in the room." She paused. "She has named 3 additional operatives connected to Conti's U.S. network that we were not previously aware of. Warrants are being prepared." "Fiore," Matteo said. "We'll need his testimony," Howe said. "Full cooperation agreement. His attorney is already on the phone with my office." Matteo nodded. He had known this was how it would resolve. He had known it in the abstract, the way you know the shape of something before you can see all its edges. But knowing it in the abstract and hearing it confirmed in a hallway on the 42nd floor of his own building were different experiences. 11 years. He let that sit for the last time. Let it be the thing it was. And then he put it down. "What about Conti directly?" he asked. "The man himself. The Italian authorities have been notified," Howe said. "Our counterparts in Rome have been working a parallel case for 8 months. What we're giving them tonight, the historical documents, the financial evidence, Stahl's testimony, Fiore's cooperation closes the evidentiary gaps they've been working around." She paused. "Emilio Conti will be 74 years old by the time the Italian case reaches trial. He will spend that birthday in a very different set of circumstances than he spent his 73rd. The hallway absorbed this. Elena was very still. Her grandmother had been 26 years old when she left Sicily. She had lived to 88. 62 years of distance and documentation and hope held very carefully in a fireproof box. "Thank you," Elena said, to Agent Howe. Howe looked at her. "Miss Russo," she said, "we should be having this conversation the other direction." At 10:15 they got the call that changed the night one final time. It came to Matteo's phone. The number was blocked. He answered it on the second ring. A voice he did not recognize said in Sicilian, "The old man wants to speak." The hallway went sharp. Matteo held the phone steady. "Then the old man can speak," he said, in Sicilian, without hesitation. A pause. The sound of a phone being transferred, And then a voice, older, careful, with the specific cadence of a man who had been conducting important conversations for 7 decades and had learned to treat every word as a decision. "Matteo Valenti," Emilio Conti said. "Your father's son." "His only son," Matteo said. "He was a remarkable man," Conti said. "I respected him enormously. What happened between us in 1997, I want you to know that was never personal." "I'm certain it wasn't," Matteo said. "What happened between your father and me was a difference of philosophy," Conti said. "About how to build things that last, about what endures and what doesn't. He believed in personal loyalty, relationships, handshakes. I believed in architecture, systems, things that survive the individuals who build them." "Your architecture appears to be having a difficult evening," Matteo said. A pause. "Yes," Conti said. "It does. You moved very quickly." "I had help," Matteo said. "The woman," Conti said. "Not a question." "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. "The Amato family," Conti said. And something in the way he said it, the particular weight he gave those 3 syllables, told Matteo that this was the name that had lived in Emilio Conti's mind for 60 years. Not as a victim, as an unresolved problem, as the one piece of his architecture that had never been fully closed. "I should have looked harder for the documents. I knew they existed. I underestimated where they were being kept." "You underestimated who was keeping them," Matteo said. "Yes," Conti said. "I underestimated a waitress." He said it without contempt, with something closer to genuine acknowledgement. "I have been building things for 60 years, and I have made very few mistakes. That was one of them." "It was a significant one," Matteo said. "It was." Conti agreed. "Are you calling this a victory, Matteo?" "I'm calling it a conclusion," Matteo said. "You tried to take something that wasn't yours. It didn't work. The rest is legal process." "The legal process will take years," Conti said. "I know," Matteo said. "I have time." A pause. "Your father would have handled this differently," Conti said. "My father is not here," Matteo said. "I am." "Yes," Conti said. "Yes, you are." Another pause, then with something that Matteo could not quite categorize, but that sounded improbably almost like respect. "The woman. The Amato girl. She's more dangerous than you are." "I know," Matteo said. "She would agree with you." The line went quiet for a moment. Then Emilio Conti said, "Tell her her grandmother was a remarkable woman. Whatever else is true, that is true." And the line went dead. Matteo lowered his phone. Elena was watching him. "That was Conti," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "What did he say?" Matteo looked at her. "He said your grandmother was a remarkable woman." Something moved through Elena's face. It moved fast, and she controlled it quickly, but Matteo saw it, the thing underneath the composure that had been there all along, held back through 48 hours of crisis and precision and forward motion. The grief that patience sits on top of, the love that documentation is built from. She pressed her lips together once. She nodded. "She was," she said. Agent Howe left the building at 11:30 with the fireproof box under her arm, properly documented chain of custody, established every letter and photograph and handwritten note, catalogued and receipted and given to Elena's signature, before it left her possession. Elena had signed the receipt with the pen Kessler provided. Her hand had been completely steady. When Howe was gone, the 42nd floor emptied gradually. The DOJ team first, then Kessler and his associates, then Sandra with her laptops and her characteristic absence of goodbyes. Donovan stayed. He would stay until morning by preference and by instinct, because Donovan Reed had not survived 20 years in Matteo's world, by assuming that the end of an event and the end of a threat were the same moment. By midnight, it was Matteo and Elena and Donovan, and 2 of Donovan's people, in a building that had returned to the silence of a place that had released something. Elena was standing at the window of the conference room. Matteo came to stand beside her. Below them, New York continued being New York, indifferent, magnificent, entirely absorbed in its own constant reinvention. 48 hours ago, I was pouring wine at Tre Lucy, Elena said. 48 hours ago, someone was planning to kill me, Matteo said. Both of those things happened on the same Thursday, she said. Yes. That's a significant Thursday. One of the more significant ones I've experienced, he said. She looked at him sideways. Are you making a joke? She said. I'm attempting one, he said. I'm aware I don't have great range in that area. She turned to look at him fully. You have more range than you think, she said. You've been keeping most of it behind that door. He looked at her. The contained thing, he said. Yes. A pause. What happens to you now? He asked. To your life, your apartment, Gerald who waters your plants. Gerald will have overwatered by now, she said. He always does when I'm gone more than 2 days. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know what happens to my life. I know what doesn't happen. I can't go back to Tre Lucy. I can't go back to being invisible. Whatever the next thing is, it's not that. No, he said. It's not. What are you suggesting? She said. I'm not suggesting anything yet, he said. I'm thinking. Out loud, she said. At you, he said. She almost smiled, not quite, the near equivalent of one. Think faster, she said. I've been awake for 42 hours. I need someone who understands languages and people, and the spaces between what people say and what they mean, he said. Who can be in rooms where important things are discussed and understand what others miss? Who knows when to speak and when to listen, and what the difference costs? That's a job description, she said. It is. For what position? One that doesn't exist yet, he said. I would need to create it. She looked at him. You're going to restructure the organization, she said. After tonight, after Fiore, after the DOJ involvement, after the case that's now in motion, you're going to have to change what Valenti Capital is. Substantially, he said. And you want me involved in what it becomes. I want you involved in designing what it becomes, he said. There's a difference. She held his gaze for a long moment. I'm not doing it from behind the scenes, she said. I'm not the invisible person in another room hearing things. If I'm involved in building something, I'm involved. Visibly. With a seat that's actually mine. I know, he said. You're comfortable with that. I'm learning to be comfortable with quite a few things I wasn't comfortable with 48 hours ago, he said. That particular one is not the most difficult adjustment. What's the most difficult? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Accepting that the organization I've been running, he said, has been compromised at its center for 2 years by someone I trusted absolutely, and that the response to that is not to trust no one, it's to trust better. He paused. I have not historically been good at that. Trusting better, she said. Trusting at all, he said, beyond the 3 people I mentioned. You mentioned 3, Elena said. Donovan, Kessler, Sandra. Yes, that number may need to adjust, she said. He looked at her. It already has, he said. The city below them continued its midnight operations. Somewhere to the south, federal agents were processing Vera Stahl. Somewhere in the DOJ building, Patricia Howe was building the formal case architecture from 60 years of documented evidence. Somewhere on the 41st floor, Renato Fiore was with his attorney beginning the long process of accounting for choices he could not undo. And in Palermo, an old man named Emilio Conti was sitting with the knowledge that the architecture he had spent 60 years building was cracking from a source he had dismissed as irrelevant, a waitress and a motto girl, a woman nobody had thought to notice. She told me something before she died, Elena said. My grandmother. We were sitting in her kitchen. This was about a month before the end. She was still very clear, still herself. And she said, the thing I regret most is that I was so careful for so long that I forgot how to be anything else. Elena paused. I've thought about that for years. Thought about what she meant. Whether she was warning me or just telling me something true about herself. Which do you think it was? Matteo asked. Both, Elena said. She was always doing two things at once, telling me something true and telling me something useful at the same time. She looked at her hands. I spent 3 years being careful. At Treluci, collecting information, building context, waiting for the right moment. And it was necessary. I needed that time. I needed what I learned. But... She stopped. But, Matteo said. But the moment I actually changed anything, she said, was the moment I stopped being careful and poured the wine. She looked at him. 4 seconds. That's how long the careful version of me lasted before I decided to act. 4 seconds is a very short time, he said. It's the longest 4 seconds of my life, she said. He held her look. I'm glad you chose the wine, he said. She held his look in return. So am I, she said. At 12:47 a.m. Donovan appeared in the doorway. The freeze confirmed, he said. Conti's U.S. accounts are locked as of midnight. His European financial team is going to walk into a significant surprise in approximately 5 hours. Matteo nodded. And Fiore's lawyer has confirmed full cooperation. Donovan continued. He'll begin formal deposition tomorrow morning. A pause. Matteo, it held. 2 words. From Donovan, who used words the way careful people use expensive things sparingly, and only when they were exactly what was needed. It held. The plan had held. The mirror had held. The timing had held. The case had held. The people who needed to move had moved, and the people who needed to be stopped had been stopped, and the thing that had been 60 years in building and 48 hours in execution had in the end held together. Matteo looked at the city, then at Elena, then back at Donovan. Go home, he said to Donovan. Get some sleep, both of you. He meant the 2 remaining team members down the hall. We have a great deal of work starting tomorrow, and I need everyone functional. Donovan looked at him steadily. And you, he said. Soon, Matteo said. Donovan looked briefly at Elena, then back at Matteo. Soon, he repeated, not as a question, as an acknowledgement. He left. In the conference room, the city moved through its early hours below them, and the silence between Elena and Matteo was the silence of 2 people who had been through something together that most people do not go through in a lifetime, and had come out on the other side with something that was not yet named, but was already real. I need to ask you something, Elena said. Ask, he said. That first night, she said. In the car, you asked me why I warned you. And I said something about knowing what a device in a warehouse means and not being the kind of person who stays silent. I remember, he said. That was true, she said. But it wasn't complete. He looked at her. I recognized your name, she said. When the reservation came in that evening, Matteo Valenti, I knew who you were. I had seen your name in my grandmother's letters, not often, but enough. Your father's name appeared more, but yours appeared twice. Once in a letter from 1998, the year after your father died. My grandmother wrote, "The son has taken over. I hope he is better than the world he inherited. I believe he might be." Matteo was very still. She wrote that, he said. In October 1998, Elena said. I was 10 years old, she was 64, and she wrote about you, a man she had never met, with something that I can only describe as hope. Elena paused. So when I heard those men planning to kill you, it was not just about the right thing to do in the abstract. It was about the fact that my grandmother had hoped you would be better than the world you inherited, and I was not going to let that hope be wrong. The room held this for a long moment. Matteo looked at Elena Russo, who had spent 3 years being invisible, who had spent 20 years carrying her grandmother's box, who had spent 60 years of inherited patience and 4 seconds of inherited courage, and had changed the shape of 2 families and 1 60-year network in a single evening by pouring a glass of wine and whispering 3 words. Was she right? He asked. My grandmother. He caught himself. Your grandmother, About me. Elena looked at him with the steady directness that had characterized every look she had given him since the moment in the restaurant when she had told him she was not afraid. "Ask me again in a year," she said, "when I have more data." He almost smiled, the closest he had come in 2 days to an actual full smile. "Fair enough," he said. She picked up her coat from the chair where it had sat for the last 6 hours. "I need to sleep," she said. "The car will take you wherever you need to go," he said. "And there will be 2 of Donovan's people with you until we're confident the situation is fully stable." "Gerald is going to have questions," she said. "Tell him you were visiting a friend," Matteo said. "I've never had friends who required this level of logistical support," she said. "Neither have I," he said. "Until recently." She paused at the door. She turned back. She looked at him one more time, the way you look at something you are going to see again, but want to see clearly right now in this exact moment before the moment changes into the next one. "My grandmother was right about you," she said. She did not wait for him to respond. She walked out. The case against Emilio Conti took 14 months to build and 18 months to prosecute. Vera Stahl's cooperation proved to be worth exactly what she had claimed it was worth, which was considerable. The name she provided, the documentation she surrendered, the financial pathways she mapped under oath, combined with 60 years of the Amato family archive and the electronic evidence from the mirror operation, built a case that 4 separate government agencies in 3 countries described as the most comprehensive organized financial crime prosecution in 2 decades. Renato Fiore testified for 11 days across 4 separate hearings. He was precise and detailed, and showed none of the evasiveness that cooperating witnesses sometimes fall into when the reality of accountability becomes more concrete than the idea of it. He had made his choices. He appeared in the end to understand them clearly. Emilio Conti was arrested in Palermo on a Tuesday morning in the spring. He was 73 years old, and he was in his garden, and by all accounts, he offered no resistance. Simply stood and put down whatever he was holding and allowed himself to be taken with the composure of a man who had known since a phone call in October that the morning was coming and had decided to meet it with the dignity of someone who had, at least in his own estimation, built something that lasted 60 years. It would not outlast him. That was the point. The 7 Valenti Capital subsidiaries targeted by the Meridian documents were formally confirmed as uncompromised. The financial transfers Stahl had attempted had been fully reversed. The 47-page partnership agreement was entered into evidence as Exhibit A in the federal case and became in certain legal circles something of a landmark example of embedded authorization fraud. Valenti Capital itself changed, not immediately, not completely, and not without difficulty. But it changed in the ways that Matteo had identified in the hallway at 42 floors up on a Thursday night, the restructuring of what it was toward what it could legitimately be. The legitimate infrastructure had always been real. The question had always been what surrounded it and what it was used for. Stripping away the surrounding architecture was neither fast nor clean, but it was done, and it was done with the help of Kessler and Sandra and Donovan, and a new head of international operations who had been before this appointment a translator and analyst with an unusual combination of skills and a very specific personal history. Elena Russo took the position. She took it with full title, full visibility, and a seat at every table that mattered. She turned out to be extraordinarily good at it, which surprised no one who had watched her work for more than 4 seconds. She moved out of the Queen's apartment 6 months after that October. Not immediately, she was not someone who made large life changes in response to shock or circumstance or other people's timelines. She moved when she decided to move, which was when it made sense, and she moved to a place with better light and room for the books she had always had more of than her previous spaces accommodated. Gerald, who had indeed overwatered her plants in her absence, was given the name of a very good optician by Donovan Reed, who had concluded after considerable observation that Gerald's nosiness was benign, and that people who watch hallways carefully are not always threats. Sometimes they are just people who pay attention. New York was full of them. The fireproof box, Once the evidentiary process was complete, and all materials properly processed, was returned to Elena with a formal letter from the DOJ acknowledging the contribution of the Amato family archive to a case of significant historical importance. Elena put the box in her new apartment, on the shelf above her desk, where she could see it. She did not open it often, but she knew what was in it. She had always known what was in it. The weight of it, the specific density of 60 years of patience, housed in a fireproof container, that weight had been part of her adult life for long enough that she did not need to open the box to feel it. She felt it differently now. Not as a burden, not as an obligation, as a foundation. Her grandmother had built something from exile and distance and careful unwitnessed effort, and Elena had carried it forward, and together across the distance of 60 years and one generation, they had finished what the Amato family had started. That was what it felt like. Not triumph, not vindication exactly. Something quieter and more permanent than either. Completion. Matteo asked her once on an evening about 8 months after the October that had started everything in the office she now occupied 3 floors below his, while the city did its reliable thing outside the window, what her grandmother had wanted her to do with her life. Elena thought about it. She wanted me to understand people, she said. She thought that was the most useful thing a person could do. She used to say that most of the world's worst problems came from people who refused to try to understand anyone who wasn't themselves. A pause. She wanted me to be a bridge. She didn't have a more specific plan than that. She trusted me to figure out the specifics. And have you, Matteo said, figured out the specifics? Elena looked at him across the desk. At this man she had watched for 3 years from a careful distance, who she had warned in 4 seconds, who she had spent 48 hours inside a crisis with, who she had built something new with in the months since this man who was she, had concluded exactly what her grandmother had hoped he might be. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, not without the marks of the world he had inherited and the choices he had made inside it, but better than it, working daily to be better than it. That was enough. That was more than enough. I'm working on them, she said. And Matteo Valenti, who had learned in October that trust was not a weakness, and that the most powerful person in any room was not always the most obvious one, and who had been learning since then what it meant to build something with someone instead of alone. That man looked at Elena Russo and understood, in the way he understood most things now, which was more completely and more honestly than he had allowed himself before, that the specifics were already clear. They had been clear since a Thursday night in October, when a woman nobody noticed leaned close with a bottle of wine and changed everything with 3 words. It's a trap. She had meant the warehouse. She had meant much more than the warehouse. And the man who had spent 30 years building walls had spent the last 14 months learning that the woman who whispered through them was not a threat to what he had built. She was the reason it was worth building. That was the truth. That was the whole truth. And it was the only truth that in the end needed to be said.